All right, we're all set for the party. I've trimmed the tree, hung the mistletoe, and paired all those weird-shaped knives and forks with the appropriate cheeses. And I plugged in the Bartesian.
Bartesian?
It's a home cocktail maker that makes over 60 premium cocktails, plus a whole lot of seasonal favorites, too. I just got it for $50 off. So, how about a Cosmopolitan or a mistletoe margarita?
I'm thirsty.
Watch. I just pop in a capsule, choose my strength, and...
Wow, it's beginning to feel more seasonal in here already.
If your holiday party doesn't have a bartender, then you become the bartender. Unless you've got a Bartesian, because Bartesian crafts every cocktail perfectly in as little as 30 seconds. And I just got it for $50 off.
'Tis the season to be jollier.
Add some holiday flavor to every celebration with the sleek, sophisticated home cocktail maker, Bartesian. Get $50 off any cocktail maker at bartesian.com/cocktail. That's BARTESIAN.com/cocktail.
Welcome to the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast. I'm Trish, and this is our podcast. We talk about wrestling news and various topics from different promotions, primarily AEW, but also New Japan Pro Wrestling, WWE, and topics from around the wrestling world. Whatever we find interesting, and we hope you will too. We're a proud member of the Social Suplex Podcasting Network, and you can find all our content on our podcast feed, the Social Suplex podcast feed, as well as on Twitter and YouTube. Please feel free to like, subscribe, and rate our podcast. We also have a store at Chopped Tees, so if you would like to support us or just own a really cool quality piece of clothing, please take a look at www.chopped-tees.com/social suplex. If your mind is being thrown by the fact that I'm doing this intro, sadly work keeps Sarah from being here today. So instead we thought you would bring our listeners probably the most British edition of the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast ever, as we are joined by the owner and promoter of Revolution Pro Wrestling here in the UK, Andy Quildan. Welcome, Andy.
Hi, thanks for having me. And I'm sorry it's just the two of us, but I'm sure that hopefully I can do an American accent if you want. But,
it's going to be better than mine. But no, thank you very much for giving up your time, especially with this year's Uprising event live in your court this Saturday, upcoming, which features, it's got some great matches on that card, from the Undisputed British Heavyweight Championship match between the rematch from the anniversary show between Luke Jacobs and Michael Oku, a 1 hour Iron Man match, which feels like a real undertaking. And even Mina Shirakawa defending the Undisputed British Women's Championship against Dani Luna, with the aim of taking that belt to the Tokyo Dome. I thought it was a really good time to speak to yourself, as the conversations, including here, can be very much dominated by the likes of WWE and AEW, meaning some of the issues faced by kind of independent promoters don't really get the huge coverage that they should. And also, we don't really cover the successes of them either, as much as I'd wish to. So while most of our listeners will be very much familiar with your offering, how would you describe Revolution Pro Wrestling to someone who has yet to encounter it?
Well, we have termed the phrase, or coined the phrase, pro wrestling at its best, because that's essentially what we are. Like, our philosophy is very pro wrestling based. It's very much focused on the in-ring action, and we always try to focus the best wrestlers from around the world, creating dream environments, dream matches that people didn't even think were possible, or people didn't even imagine or know they wanted to see till they see the match on paper, and they're like, oh my goodness, now I need to go out my way to see that. Almost those pinch yourself moments, and of which I feel we've had many throughout the course of our 12 years, including this year as well. And as well as that, we have just a real love for professional wrestling, be it from grassroots level, bringing wrestlers through. We've got 2 training schools in the United Kingdom, in London and in Portsmouth. So we're very heavily invested in the future of professional wrestling. And our goal and mindset is just to leave the place in a better place than it was when we found it. And that's it. We've forged relationships due to that philosophy with people like New Japan Pro Wrestling, CMLL, AEW. But we have an open door policy. We will work with anyone as long as there's kind of good business to be done, which is beneficial to both sides of the deal. And that's us in a nutshell.
You honestly, you run through so many subjects that we're going to talk about today. So that's really cool. So going back to kind of a little bit of a history lesson. So Rev Pro, for anyone that doesn't know, kind of came like as a breakaway really from IPW in the southeast of England. Can you say kind of why did you choose to break away and kind of go it alone?
Different philosophies, really. I guess like for a long while, it had been myself running IPW. All the shows you saw in Sittingbourne, which were the predominant place I promoted, the most high profile shows we promoted in front of you. Look at the tiny crowds, but you look at the level of a show, that you look top to bottom, it's a who's who of professional wrestling, not just in the United Kingdom, but from around the world. I feel like I'd very much found my identity as a promoter. I was always originally just a booker of IPW to begin with, going back to 2005. As time kind of went on, it would be me who, I guess, there came a time when it's time to put my money where my mouth is. It's all well and good spending someone else's money, but when you're spending a lot of someone else's money, there can be pushbacks and whatever have you, and I can't really control that narrative. So I wound up promoting my own IPW shows versus the IPW shows which were being promoted. There were like shows which were kind of in the I think they ran some shows in Swanley at the time.
Yes.
And you could see when we were both promoting shows, you could see the clear difference in philosophy. So it was really one of those breakaway moments, and the reality of the situation is I think I would have done it sooner, but I was perhaps too caught up on the value of some initials. And over time, I understood that it wasn't about the initials of the promotion. It was about what the promotion stood for. And it was about the philosophies, and it was about what the product we were presenting. And the second that we split away and I became Revolution Pro Wrestling, that's almost like where the handcuffs are off. But I also would say as well that if I hadn't done that, I don't think I would have progressed at such a rapid rate, and I don't think I would have been as brave. I always remember in the back of my mind, so I guess we'd just done, either we were heading into or just done the 8-year anniversary of IPW. So we definitely did the 7-year anniversary show. I promoted that for sure. But I always remember in my head, we were going to get to 10 years. And on the 10-year anniversary show, I was going to run a show at York Hall. And because at the time, that was the golden goose of British professional wrestling. It was the venue. Many people had called it a white elephant. Many people had told me you're never going to be able to make it work. But I grew up in the days of the FWA, who very much paved the way for a lot of what I do today in terms of, creating their own identity, focusing a little bit more on production. So it's not just a ring in the hall type deal, having narrative storylines that follow through, using international talents, etc. So, I had borrowed a lot of their philosophies, but they were dining off of free shows they promoted at York Hall. Nowhere close to sold out shows at York Hall as well. But they'd been dining off of those shows for years and years and years, those free shows. And I was just in my mind, I was like, we need to do York Hall. We need to do the 10-year anniversary show at York Hall. But obviously, when we split from IPW, I felt I almost had a point to prove as well. So it accelerated those plans. So I wound up going into York Hall 2 years ahead of my planned schedule. I made myself uncomfortable because I wanted to make things happen and I wanted to prove a point. And then once you start that, it's almost that snowball effect going down the hill, and it's very difficult to stop. And my whole thing is, like throughout the years, people have made things about other UK promotions, and are we competing with them, etc. But my whole philosophy throughout the whole thing has been the only person I'm competing with is myself yesterday. So I just want to make sure that we're always making positive steps forward. Of course, I pay attention to what everyone else is doing. That's kind of my job. The same way I watch all wrestling around the world. It's my job, right? However, the only person I'm comparing myself to is myself yesterday. So that's the only metric I care about. Are we moving forward? Is there growth? What are we doing tomorrow? What are we doing next week? What are we doing next month? What are we doing next year? That's all I measure myself against. And that's kind of, almost rung true. You know, I see in other people do stuff. It does inspire you. It does spur you on, no doubt. But you can't work yourself into the situation whereby all of a sudden you're focusing so much on someone else, you're not looking at yourself and what you're doing.
That's a really healthy mentality to have in any walk of life, I think, not just, in pro wrestling. But, it's not easy to start even a breakaway company, even with the experience that you had with IPW. What were kind of some of the challenges that you experienced when you were trying to establish that brand early on?
So there were some teething problems. So we had even though we were running the exact same venues, essentially the same rosters that these venues had seen, and we kept the same champions, and we followed through with the storylines, basically the storylines which had started under my watch in IPW carried on in Rev Pro. So it was really a seamless transition, but I think what I probably underestimated was there was an element of brand loyalty, and there was an element, and I've never been someone who, I guess I'm a bad self-promoter, right? In terms of, I don't think a lot of people realize how much that I personally do.
Right.
And I think that a lot of people are taking credit for a lot of stuff that I've done in IPW, and I don't think people have realized that. So there's almost a sense of loyalty to the old guard, loyalty to the IPW brand name, etc. And we had to overcome that. But it didn't take long to do that because, where they continued to present what they were presenting and I continued to present what I was presenting, it soon became very clear what was what and what was the lay of the land. But I do remember the first few shows after that, there was a bit of, teething issues, so to speak. And as well as that, I remember that was around the time where I just couldn't seem to catch a break. I remember we were building up this Marty Skull and Spud rivalry at the time, and they went and did British boot camp, and the end of the year was supposed to be the big Marty and Spud street fight to end this whole thing. And it was our Uprising events, which is ironic because we're coming up to Uprising right now. And it was we were actually doing a weekend of shows for Uprising, and that was the main event of the second night. And on the first night, they were obviously heavily involved as well. And it just so happened that 2 weeks before the show, TNA were like, oh, we decided we're going to do the live finals of boot camp or whatever. We need to take the guys out to America. So I lost my headline wrestlers there and then. So there was awkward stuff like that. And I'm pretty sure that was a show where I think we had Sammy Callahan as well. And I think he missed that weekend as well. I think he was supposed to be in quite high profile matches that weekend also. So it just felt like I couldn't catch a break really. But yeah, we got there in the end. And it worked out for the best as well. Like at the time you don't see stuff like this at the time, but it worked out for the best anyway, because then we were able to still deliver decent shows for Uprising, the Uprising Weekender, which the focus almost turned to, it was a retirement weekend in the UK of Jerry Lynn. So again, something that we always try to do is create those moments, those memorable moments. So Jerry Lynn's last UK matches happened in Revolution Pro Wrestling. And so we were able to kind of almost refocus that weekend. And then that Marty Spud match rolled across into the following year, but it was our first show of the following year. So I think it was our first show of the following year anyway. But anyway, the following year we were able to start strong the following year, and then we used that show to kickstart a lot more storylines, which then set us on course to where we kind of finally wound up at York Hall, because that was I guess that would have been the York Hall year. So June 2013 was the first show at York Hall. So so that was it really.
So one of the shows that I first remember going to at York Hall, so obviously I'm Northern based these days, was in 2015, just after you started your agreement with New Japan Pro Wrestling. I just remember the sheer excitement of getting to see the likes of Okada, Tanahashi, and Nakamura in that venue. And to me, it kind of led me to be far more invested in New Japan and really illustrated kind of the power of the live show. So we look at it and we think that your ability to, you've mentioned it already, but your ability to build kind of deep relationships with other companies, most notably with New Japan Pro Wrestling, is kind of one of your real strengths. How did that relationship kind of come about?
So the relationship itself all came about, almost because of your call. But at the time we were working with a wrestler you might have heard of called Prince Devitt. I'm not sure what he's up to these days, but he was our cruiserweight champion at the time. And we needed something big for our first show at York Hall. Again, when thinking back to those FWA shows at York Hall, they're always synonymous with big names in the independent scene. And I thought, what could be more perfect than Jushin Thunder Liger? And I feel like he was the right guy to start the relationship, because you think about it and you think he had the exposure in WCW. For a casual fan, he looks badass. Like this fighting Power Ranger type character that looks great on the posters. And for anyone that follows Japanese professional wrestling, he's an absolute legend. So he ticked every single box, and he was still having high level professional wrestling matches. So through Fergal, we were able to broker the deal with New Japan Pro Wrestling to get Jushin Liger in. But in my mind, then this was a time when New Japan, I think, like, they were doing their pay-per-view, so they'd started to become more accessible. So when my fandom was like, the only way you could watch New Japan Pro Wrestling was on videotape, through tape traders. Something that I found through FWA when I used to go to watch shows. One of the reasons I went to shows more than anything was to get the latest releases from the likes of New Japan Pro Wrestling, and I hate to say it, CZW at the time, and then obviously later Ring of Honor. But we used to do, get our bootleg tapes from the FWA shows, from Strong Style Tapes. And then obviously my gateway drug into New Japan Pro Wrestling was, like many others, I think it was Best of Super Juniors, 1995. Would that have been the one with Jushin Liger, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, the famous Best of Super Juniors. And then from there, and I'm very aware that obviously this is kind of going back and forth, and obviously this was later in the day as well. But then from there I got like my Best of Dynamite Kid tape, and my mind was blown by Tiger Mask and Dynamite Kid and Black Tiger, who was, of course, that was Eddie Guerrero in the Super Juniors that I watched. But Black Tiger was, of course, Mark Rollerball Rocco from the UK. And what ties this all in nicely as well is the guest of honor, the person presenting the belt at our first show. The main event of the first show was Prince Devitt versus Jushin Liger for the Cruiserweight Championship. And the man who was presenting the belt to the winners was the late, great Rollerball Rocco. So it was like the three generations of junior heavyweight professional wrestling. And that's something we always try to do in Rev Pro as well, is we try to tip our hat and we try to remember the past and we try to respect those that paved the way. I'd seen all those tapes, and that was the closest I could get to New Japan. And you'd see a big show. So there was a big magazine in the UK at the time, Power Slam magazine. And they would put pictures of the New Japan shows in, and you'd read about them in the section. And maybe months later, you'd get to see a videotape of that if you were lucky. But New Japan had just started to do online streaming. But it was quite an expensive endeavor. And it wasn't every single show which was streamed. But I had, really started to become, I guess I was disillusioned by the product that was being presented in mainstream professional wrestling at the time. So New Japan Pro Wrestling found me at the right time. And then I remember, I want to say it was at the top of that year where there's that Minoru Suzuki and Tanahashi match at the Tokyo Dome. And I was mesmerized. I just remember Suzuki got Tanahashi in a figure four leg lock for a very, very long time. And I've never seen something so compelling in terms of, it was the figure four leg lock. It was in for so long, but it was the nuances of the hold, the facials of Tanahashi, the facials of Suzuki. Every time he cranked it, Tanahashi's about to turn it over. Boom, Suzuki gets him back. That maniacal laugh on his, everything about that match made me fall in love with wrestling again. And from that point, I consumed every single New Japan show I could. And then, of course, later we got New Japan World. where we didn't really, that was it, from that point on, it was a perfect time to get into New Japan Pro Wrestling. It's Tanahashi in his absolute prime. But I felt that, for me, Jushin Liger was the first guy to bring him just because of, all those boxes that he ticked. And then I knew the next person I wanted to bring in was Tanahashi. Now, every single time we brought someone in, it was one person at a time to begin with. Every single time we brought someone in, we wanted to look at how do we market these people. So the first person we brought in after Liger was Tanahashi. We marketed him as the best wrestler in the world. I remember, even right now, I remember the way we kind of introduced him. There was we had Brian Elliott from Fighting Spirit magazine. We had Dave Meltzer from the Wrestling Observer. Sound bites of them saying Tanahashi's the best wrestler in the world. All the different achievements he'd won Tokyo Sports MVP, Wrestling Observer Newsletter Wrestler of the Year, Match of the Year. We had all the different accolades and everything. So we were teaching the people who these wrestlers were. And what was so cool about it is, say we had 1,000 people at York Hall, there might be 150 people who were very aware who Tanahashi was, right? And their excitement kind of spilled to the people next to them. So they knew that this guy must be a big deal because look at the way these people are reacting. But then we're telling people that these guys are a big deal. So it's almost like like you say, it's that you can't. There's nothing like the live experience of the professional wrestler to turn you into long-term fans of that wrestler. And that's really how New Japan's relationship with us and relationship with the United Kingdom grew. Through those one-off appearances. And from there, I looked at who do we get next? It was Shinsuke Nakamura next, because I remember, I never forget the first time I saw Shinsuke Nakamura. Look, again, it's almost, I think we forget because obviously he's so, I guess he's so mainstream now. And obviously he's not the same Shinsuke as before, but the first time I saw Shinsuke Nakamura, I'd never seen anyone like him. The way he moved around the ring, the way he carried himself like a superstar, just his mannerisms, just everything about him, like the music, the presentation. And I was just like, this guy will translate better than anyone to the Western audience, And the fact that he is almost, you can say what you like about his WWE run, but he's one of a few Japanese professional wrestlers who've been able to come across to the United States and still be a superstar. You can't argue Shinsuke Nakamura as a WWE superstar. He's almost a part of the fabric now in WWE. And I think that's a huge credit to him because look at throughout the years, the amount of people who tried to make that transition and not been able to do it. But Shinsuke has been able to do that. And the fact that he's been able to do that towards the tail end of his career as well is even more impressive, I believe. And then from Shinsuke Nakamura, we went to, of course, Okada. And this one was a rainstorm on the video screen, and we're going to make it rain. And that was it, And then when Okada came, obviously we made sure we presented him with, and bearing in mind, this is production didn't exist in this time, right? And this is Okada coming out. He's got the gold confetti, presented like a superstar. People treat him like a superstar. And then from there, we move into the Global Wars shows. And then from the Global Wars shows, we move into getting Will Ospreay to New Japan. And then from there, the bonds just grows tighter and tighter and tighter. The trust grows, the relationship grows. And the rest, I guess, is kind of history.
And not only have you been able to bring so much, New Japan talent to UK, and I think the presentation element is really important because, I was at the Liger show with Devitt, with Rollerball, who I dearly miss, it's presenting. And it just felt like such an occasion, and you do feel that energy. And it did kind of transcend what you maybe have thought coming in. But it's not just those kind of talents that you've been able to bring in. You've also kind of become a home for young Japanese talents on excursions. With the likes of Great Okan, this year's Dome main eventer Shota Umino, and New Japan Cup winner Yota Tsuji, all coming through Rev Pro as they've continued their development. What do you think do you think that the kind of relationship and the trust that you built up with New Japan over that period led to them having the trust in you to take care of kind of what is essentially their future investment?
Yeah, absolutely. And And again, I think it's not just a credit to what we've done and the trust we've built, but it's also a credit to our roster, because they know, like I remember Tanahashi was obviously just here recently for Global Wars UK this year, and Tanahashi was blown away by the level of talent we have. I can't understate this enough. You know, he was blown away by the level of talent. And again, every single year, our talent is getting better and better. The depth is getting deeper and deeper. And of course, sometimes you have growing pains. And of course, sometimes you have to sacrifice. I always use this term a lot. You know, when you're bringing young talent through, they're not going to hit it out the park every single time. But at the moment, we're kind of reaping the rewards of putting the faith in, you know, this new and fresh and exciting talent. And like I say, I think that for me, I always say, like, look, we don't have the budget to be able to compete with, you know, the bigger promotions, but pound for pound, I genuinely believe we're the best. And it's a big boast, I know, and it's a big claim, but I genuinely believe that, and I feel that now the talent knows when they come over here, you know, they're going to be learning so much. They're going to work, you know, your Michael Okus, your Luke Jacobs, your Connor Mills, you know, they're going to be working those guys and Robbie X's, and, you know, they're going to be learning so much as well. And there's such a diversity of styles as well that I think it's good. I just remember there's key things about, you know, with Shota and Yota through their excursion stuff, like, you know, they worked a chain match as an example, right? And that's the type of thing that they need to be doing, because they need to be coming outside their comfort zone. The whole Great Okan character was born in the United Kingdom. I know a lot of people had question marks about that character at the time, but the fact is it was a New Japan creation, and they just wanted us to just play with their creation, essentially, you know. And I believe that, for example, for me, the Great Okan, like, I think people often got lost in the gimmick, couldn't see past the gimmick to see Great Okan is actually a pretty high level wrestler, right? And he had a lot of real good matches, but a lot of people got caught up in the gimmick and couldn't see past that. But I feel like if you look at the work we did with Great Okan, and you look at the way that full circle moment where Michael Oku became the undisputed British heavyweight champion, defeating the Great Okan, a man who'd been undefeated for 5 years in Revolution Pro Wrestling, you know, it was just a great moment. And it was like all, you know, everything kind of came together in that moment. And it was great that Oka wanted to continue to work with us. And, you know, once he went back to Japan, and you almost saw as well, like, for example, Yota Tsuji came through for us at Global Wars, you know. It was the morning of the show, and Leo Rush had missed his flight to the UK, and he'd got on another flight. Now, if the show was in London, we would have been cool, but the flight was in Doncaster, and he was flying into London. And he'd got on another flight, and basically, I called Yota it was like, God, it was maybe, so the guys were leaving at 8:30 a.m., I think, from a hotel in London. And I called Yota at maybe 8 a.m. And I was like, please, my friend, come and save my show. And and like, we were still hoping Leo Rush would make the show, but Yota, without knowing if for sure he was going to be wrestling, he got on that bus from London, the talent bus, not a National Express or anything, but you know, he got on that talent bus from London, prepared to step in. And obviously, as it became more and more apparent, you know, that Leo wasn't going to take the show, he kind of filled in for us, you know, and saved us there. So, you know, that's why it's great to kind of build those relationships and have those relationships we can call upon, you know.
It's a really kind of big surprise for, you know, the audience in Doncaster. They were really happy to see him. And I think with Yota, you it's probably one of the people I can think that you can see his development while he was on Excursion the most. I feel like he had one of the most notable differences from coming out of New Japan as a young lion to what he returned as. That was pretty cool to see. You know, it wouldn't be right if I didn't mention that not everybody has been completely positive on their experience here. So Shota Newman made some comments around, you know, living in a house share in Portsmouth and not being completely happy with his experience. What did you think when you saw those comments or read the translation, as most of us did? I
just thought typical Shota. So look, the reality of the situation is, like, he was only there for like a couple of months, and he could have moved at any point to another place. So New Japan basically just asked us to find accommodation for the wrestlers, which is essentially private accommodation. It's no different if you were to look for accommodation yourself. If you were to move to somewhere and look for accommodation yourself, and my job is essentially to kind of look at the property and make sure the property is suitable. The property was more than suitable, obviously, given the budgets that the talents have. So basically, they're paid a salary by New Japan Pro Wrestling, and then they're paid per appearance for us. And the idea is the salary from New Japan Pro Wrestling will cover their living, their food expenses. What they make on top from wrestling is what they make on top for wrestling. So he could have moved houses, and we're going to move them into the house that Yota was in, so they could be together. And this was like the second house, because before he was staying with Hikuleu, right? So it was like, so basically it was the second stint. It was after COVID. It was coming back post-COVID, and he was there for maybe 2 months at the most, and we'd arranged for him to move into Yota's place, and he didn't want to. And then he had made the decision that he wanted to move in with Will Ospreay. So he moved into Will Ospreay's place. So he was there for like 2 months at the most, like I say, and it was kind of disappointing to see him complaining about it. But like I say, like I feel like it's. I don't want to speak. I'm not here to speak negatively at all. Yeah, and I still have a good relationship with Shota and whatever have you. But like, I feel like it was unnecessary. Those comments. Again, we don't know how it was translated or whatever. I also feel that a lot of people also blew it out of proportion as well. And I see comments all the time about people saying like, oh, why are they on excursion? And look, all I say is this: look at the guys who've gone into excursion elsewhere. Look at when Evil went on excursion in Ring of Honor, and count how many matches that Evil competed for in Ring of Honor. Right? Compare that to the amount of matches that Shota had, the amount of matches that Tsuji had, the amount of matches that Oka had, the amount of matches that Hikuleu had. You get out what you put in, essentially. And I feel that the ones that got the most out of it, the ones that put the most into it, and I look at people like Yota, and I look at people like Hikuleu, like Okan, who, I believe they got the most out of the situation. I think Shota's always been earmarked to be a superstar. I think Shota's always had a unique ability to be able to connect with an audience, and I hope that he's able to get it over the line. I really do, because I feel like he's an exceptional talent, and I think against the right opponent, he excels. But I think sometimes he leans too much into, for example, the relationship with John Moxley. That was always a big part of his presentation. Coming out with a Death Rider's jacket and what I think, leaning too much into that rather than being his own man. And I hope that he can. Use the platform he's got currently to be able to become his own man and show us what we all know he's capable of being. So, yeah.
Yeah, and we fully agree with that, because we've spoken about that, how he kind of feels like his identity is very mixed between, elements of Tanahashi and elements of Moxley, and how that kind of moves forward. And it's a big test for him this year. It's a spot that you don't see generally someone at that kind of level of development in New Japan. So I'm hoping he'll go very well. I'll be in attendance. So looking forward to that one. But the slower nature of the kind of New Japan development system is something even New Japan management have kind of indicated that they want to speed up. There's also a bit of an albatross in today's kind of pro wrestling world, because we're seeing kind of talent being moved up and signed by major companies quicker than ever. Yeah, but there are different paths. So someone like Leon Slater, who is in the Ironman match on a Saturday, he has a contract with TNA, which allows him to kind of learn TV wrestling, but also to continue on the independents. And that's a different path from what some of them are taking. But development is kind of something that's really synonymous for me and for a lot of people with Revolution Pro Wrestling. And it's another thing that we think is a real kind of strength to your armory. And because of the way that everything works, you kind of constantly have to be in that kind of business. So what are you kind of looking for when you're recruiting wrestlers to your promotion?
So there's different levels to it. So there's different levels of where you can come in. So obviously we look for, above all, we look for attitude, positive attitude, because if you don't have a positive attitude, it's not going to work. And negativity, I guess it's kind of almost a taboo subject, given, all the gossip that everyone has around the world of professional wrestling. But one small bit of negativity can then rub off on those around you. So if you don't have the right attitude, you're never going to fit in anyway. And especially given the level of what we're doing. Look, we make no secret about the fact of, we're very much grassroots professional wrestling. We're very much DIY. We're very much independent. I think that, I feel like a big credit to us is the fact that a lot of people, they look at us and they kind of assume we're not independent. An independent professional wrestling company. They hold us on the same merits as like a Ring of Honor, a TNA, a New Japan. Do you know what I mean? They hold us on those merits when we're as independent as we could possibly be, and we're kind of as in-house as you could possibly be and as DIY as you could possibly be. We've got no funding from anyone. We've got no sponsors. We've got no funding. We've got no support from anyone. Any of the partnerships that we have, it's financial. If we bring someone in from New Japan Pro Wrestling, they're not giving us someone from New Japan Pro Wrestling. We are paying to use the person from New Japan Pro Wrestling. We're not getting handouts. We're not getting freebies, So I think that's very important to kind of bear in mind. And sorry, I've forgotten the original. What's the original question?
No, it's just okay. Just looking at kind of what do you look for when you are kind of bringing people in?
Yeah. Right. So because of where we're at, in terms of, having to push forward in such a way, no one's getting rich out of this, but we're at the same time, our goal is, again, looking back at that mindset of trying to compete with yourself yesterday, the goal is to try and one day find ourselves in a situation whereby we can all make money at this, but we're in that awkward growing stage at the moment. Right. So we need people with a positive attitude, because it's a thankless job. It's a thankless job as a promoter. It's a thankless job as a wrestler. Right. In this environment. Right. So we need that positivity. We need everyone pulling and pushing in the same direction, because we're all part of a team. And unless you're all of that mindset of we're going to make this thing grow, we're going to work together, then you're never going to achieve it. And I look at our biggest success stories are those who are fully invested in Revolution Pro Wrestling. Our biggest success stories are those that have that mindset, that help those around them, that want to push us forward. And you see that because they come back time after time. You look at people like Will Ospreay, you look at people like Zack Sabre Jr., you look at people like El Phantasmo. Those are the kind of guys, that kind of have had that mindset, had that positivity. And even when they achieve success, they then come back. People like Kyle Fletcher, Mark Davis, they're great examples of it right now. Of course, they came back at our anniversary show last year. Of course, we still keep in close contact with them. So it's people like that, that we got that kind of mindset. We look for, obviously, raw ability, raw talent, charisma, charisma, timing, instinct, stuff you can't teach, right? And then we kind of try to bring them into almost a finishing off school, which is what we kind of, try to help refine their acts on live shows. And again, it comes back to that attitude, because, you can have someone who's got all the raw ability in the world, but unless they have the right attitude, they're not going to progress past a certain point. And we've seen that over the years with certain wrestlers. But the beauty of it now is, and I say it to the guys all the time, because everyone's so young coming in, like, people can now afford to make mistakes. People can afford to take the wrong path for a couple of years and then come back to the fold, so to speak, with a different mindset and learning from their mistakes. Not everyone has to be in such a rush now. You look around you. I was in the locker room the other day with Leon Slater and Leon Cage. Leon Slater sat there. Leon Slater, what is he, 19 years of age, I think he is now, Leon Slater. And Leon Slater sat there and he's going, I feel old, man. Like, looking at Leon Cage, it's like little 17-year-old prodigy. We've got this, we've got one lad in our training school at the moment, it's 15 years of age, right? It's like, what the hell, Cameron Kai, 18, it's just insane, right? So they can afford to make mistakes and, come back and whatever. And obviously it depends where, it depends where they're at, is where they get slotted in. There's a Zoya, when we first saw him, he gets an opportunity, takes that opportunity with both hands. And then as a result, you see his ability to connect with the people. You see how unique he is, the questions he asks after the matches, he wants to learn. You see him take advice that he gets from a previous match and take it into his next match. You see his development, and you can see that he can be plugged straight in at the very top. And then his acceleration is going to be so fast, because when you're working with quite literally the best wrestlers in the world, you can't help but learn. You can't help but grow. And in many ways, like I say, it's like the generation of wrestlers we've got right now are lucky, because they all basically, for something to get good, and you can look at any sport, right? You have to have the generation before you be successful, and then you have to have some young guys coming through at the same time as the generation before you is kind of at the top of their game, because they teach their lessons, they pass it on. So Zack Sabre Jr., he was in a tough position. So I look at Zach, Marty, Martin Stone, Spud, those guys, the original class, if you will. You look at those guys and you say, who did they have to learn from, right? And you look at the state that British wrestling was when they got involved, and they didn't really have anyone to learn from. But then we had to bring guys in for them to learn from. So we're talking about people like El Generico, people like Kevin Steen, guys like that who, again, later on, guys like AJ Styles, top level guys, Danielson, perhaps you could include Pac in that first class as well, but he's a completely different animal to them all, but they had to learn from those guys, A Jerry Lynn would come in and work with one of those guys. An El Generico would come in and work with one of those guys, and and they would learn lessons from them. And then when they learned those lessons, they would teach them to the next lot of people that came through. But of course, once they started to find that success, once they started to work those high-profile names, those high-profile names would start to give those guys a platform in the United States. They'd be like, "Hey, you should book Zack Sabre Jr." And then they'd go out, and then obviously your next class of people after that, your Mark Haskins, your obviously Will Ospreay, I guess you could class in that class. Flash Morgan Webster, Mark Andrews. You look at those PWG shows when that boom of British wrestling. But Mark Haskins learned the lessons from Zack Sabre Jr. Mark Haskins learned, those lessons from those people that came before him, right? So each generation strengthens the next generation. But now we're fortunate, we're in a situation where all of those guys are still active, and Zack Sabre Jr. will still come back. He'll come back 4 or 5 times a year. But Zack, whenever he comes back, he will hit me up for a login to the on-demand. He'll watch all the on-demand shows. He will go through stuff with me about kind of, people he's seen, people he likes, what people can work on, etc. But then when he comes, when they ask him for advice, he's not coming in cold. So he will watch Zaya matches, and then Zaya will come up to him for advice, and Zack won't just give him advice from that match he's had tonight. He will say, "I've been watching your stuff, and here's what you can do." And I use Zaya as a particular case, because I said to Zack, "I've got a special talent here. Please, can you just watch his stuff and come back to me with your thoughts?" Do you know what I mean? And so he's able to provide that level of feedback. But not only is Zaya getting that level of feedback from your Will Ospreays, from your Zack Sabre Juniors, but he's also then getting to compete with Luke Jacobs, with Michael Oku, with Leon Slater. These guys who have become almost young veterans in their own right. So it's just it's just a crazy time right now, and every generation is strengthening the generation before. And it's scary to think. You look at a Leon Cage at 17 years of age, and a couple of years under his belt. You look at a Cameron Kai at 18 years of age. Like Cameron Kai, the thing that blows my mind most about Cameron Kai is he had no experience of professional wrestling at all until post-COVID. So I want to say Cameron Kai's first sessions back were probably non-contact sessions when we were just doing individual work, And I just think that's insane, and you get someone coming at that level, that good already, and then think about all these people he's going to have the benefit of working throughout, the next few years of his career. And I think it's almost a credit to him. He's almost part of the furniture now. You forget how young he is and how young he is in his career. And and I just think it's crazy, and I can't wait. Like, I always look at, underrated wrestlers as well. Someone like a Will Caven, right? I believe he's very, very underrated, right? And I just say, look at Will Caven, look at the level of matches Will Caven's been having under the radar. Look at his match against Leon Cage, look at the matches he's been having in these trios with True and Lacey. Look at the matches that he's had with the likes of Robbie X, Michael Oku. Will Caven, like, he had a great match with Eric Dillinger, like just a US indie guy, in one of our Southampton shows recently. And he just has banger after banger after banger. But, like, he's almost under the radar, become almost that young veteran. He's like he's just one of the most reliable hands that we have. So young into his professional wrestling career. He debuted on Rev Pro shows, I want to say 2 years ago, and he's someone who's got himself in as part of the furniture. He's the type of wrestler that everyone wants to wrestle because he just has good matches. He's great for everyone to work with. So yeah, like I say, there's so many different levels of guys that come through, and there's different ways from everyone. Of course, we've got our contenders division. We've got guys to be slotted in right at the top. We've got guys to come in with character. Who've got that. The contenders division is designed. We don't really have much of one going on at the moment, but, like, the contenders division is designed for guys who don't have character per se, who don't know who they are in the ring yet, but are very solid in the ring. So they know their fundamentals, but they haven't quite developed into the all-rounders that they are right now. And if you look at the contenders division over the years of people who've come through, and the success rate as well, you look at, I wouldn't be able to, do this without mentioning Curtis Chapman, for example, as someone who came through that contenders division, and he's someone who found a calling for himself first as a super contender, and then Mad Kurt magically was born through that and all the moments that created. But then, there are guys like Brendan White, for example, who, came through that system. David Francisco is probably the most recent example of that, and someone who's utterly found himself as being one of the most annoying human beings on planet Earth. Having had to essentially hide his true identity for the last 2 years, now showing his true form, and we're all regretting it. Is there for people to find themselves in a lower pressure environment, because I feel like a lot of people sometimes they psych themselves out. Rev Pro is no different to any other show they work, but they often psych themselves out because there's a lot of eyeballs on them, there's a lot of pressure on them, and also the work you do at Rev Pro kind of lasts forever via the wonders of Rev Pro on demand, and then people remember that stuff, and people know that, people will be looking through the archive and they might stumble on your matches, etc. And I think that puts an unnecessary pressure on people. They don't need to have that pressure, but when you're and for the further you are on in your career, the less likely you are to have that pressure. But the earlier you are, that's why the contenders division often suits people better, because there's less pressure on you, less expectation on you, and it enables you to become comfortable in your environment, comfortable with the locker room, comfortable with the fans, comfortable with the rings. Because we wrestle in 20-foot rings, it's very abnormal to British wrestling, and we were like, normally the British wrestling rings are 16 foot. We were either 18 foot or 20 foot, but we've kind of made the decision now we're only working in 20-foot rings. Because now I feel like I look at smaller rings, it looks like a toy. They look like toy rings. But also, it reminds me, when I first started to go to watch shows, one of the big things was, with the small rings, you're thinking, this isn't real. This isn't the proper wrestling. Your biggest prop is a ring, And we're like, this isn't the proper wrestling, because look how tiny the ring is. It's not a proper ring, And I just feel like the big ring is a big part of that as well. But that often throws people off the first time as well.
It almost felt like they were borrowing from boxing when you first saw them rings. That was
Yes.
kind of the impression that I always got when I started going to shows. It's like, why is there a boxing ring in here? But
look, I'm sure a lot of that dates back to the fact that a lot of the rings which would have been used would have been boxing rings anyway, and it would have been like, so the venues often would have rings stored in them, and they might be old boxing rings, and they might work for boxing and wrestling, so I think that's probably what it leans back to. And I'm sure a lot of the early ring makers were just boxing ring makers, because look, I don't really think a professional ring maker is it's not really something you see on many people's CVs, is it? So
sure.
I think that's a lot to do with it as well.
It's interesting to hear you talk about that, because I think there's a real kind of, maybe not a stigma, but there's the way that we talk about independent wrestling, post the creation of AEW and WWE kind of expanding their NXT, is we think of it as kind of the impression I always get is people forget like it's barren compared to the generation before, rather than offering more opportunities than it would if you came through in that generation now. So that's kind of really interesting to hear you talk about. But one of the things that you did mention is kind of how you bring in talent then once you have people of a certain level that can really elevate them upwards, not just in your promotion, but also in terms of their name in the US or globally. And I think we saw a really good example of that with Luke Jacobs, who's headlining this week's show, when he wrestled Tomohiro Ishii at the 2023 anniversary show. What was it kind of about that match? Because it kind of really felt a buzz. In fact, I thought it was probably the best match of the entire weekend. But what did that match really kind of illustrate to you that he was ready to move upwards, from previously being kind of a cruiserweight champion into very much your main event scene?
We knew he was ready at that time. We knew at that time it wasn't even a question of it wasn't a question of if, it was a question of when. When you're because he was demonstrating it week in, week out. You remember back to, I guess it was the start of that year, he had a match with Will Ospreay, and it was just like, that was kind of cemented the thought process in my mind that he was absolutely more than ready. I guess almost the idea behind the cruiserweight Luke Jacobs into the heavyweight was almost a case of just the gradual steps, and to tell a story as well. And yeah, it was just, I don't know, like we just knew by that time we knew, and by these points, like it's not, sometimes you can kind of speculate and put people on with someone and it's kind of sink or swim, we'll see if you've got what it takes, we can do that with guys. I guess probably a better example would be JJ Gale, when he had his match with Ishii at this year's anniversary show. This was sink or swim for him. He swam. Absolutely, right? But like with JJ, he had so JJ was on who did he wrestle? He wrestled Fujita at that anniversary show, right? And I think it's fair to say that JJ got in his own head. He let other people influence what he was going to do within that professional wrestling match, and he didn't put his best foot forward. I think if you watched that Fujita and Gale match, I don't think you would have gone out of it going like, oh, that was a bad match. It was a good match in isolation, but it wasn't what we knew JJ could achieve and accomplish. But it was the first time that JJ had found himself in that situation. And he's probably a great example of someone who, in terms of, he started through our contenders division as well. And JJ is one of the guys who, you look at, like, I hate the term pillars after the, after the AEW stuff, but like, but he's one of the backbones. When I look at the guys, I look at, obviously guys are coming through all the time, but I look at our top end, and I look at Luke Jacobs, I look at Michael Oku, I look at Leon Slater, I look at Zazoya, I look at Ricky Knight Jr., I look at Connor Mills, and I look at JJ Gale, right? With the 7 guys I've just named there, and I've probably missed some as well, right? But with those 7 guys, you could build any wrestling promotion in the world around those top level guys, right? But I think you can only really be saying that about JJ after this year because he's passed a lot of tests. So JJ had that match with Fujita. He then needed his match with Zack Sabre Jr. Now, the match with Zack Sabre Jr. was about, again, in terms of progression, it might not be what people, so they'd had a rivalry or whatever, and it might not be what people were expecting from the match. again, another good match. But this was a match for JJ. This was a match for JJ to prove that he could get through a match against world-class competition and swim, essentially. So once he'd achieved that, there was nothing to be afraid of. And then we go to his first high-profile match of this year is against Luke Jacobs. And this was a test for Luke and JJ. You can do it against the high-profile wrestlers. You can do it against your Zack Sabre Juniors. You can do it against Ishii. But can you have that standout match of the night level performance with two British wrestlers? And I believe if it wasn't for Ospreay and Oku on that night at Crystal Palace, we'd still be talking about JJ and Jacobs again on this day, right? And they absolutely smashed it out of the park. And when stuff like that happens, that breeds confidence. The ability's already there, right? But that breeds confidence, and they know they can do it. And from that point, there's no looking back. And then you look at JJ's going into that situation, the highest pressure that he's had, that match with Ishii, and he absolutely smashed it and showed that he's ready and shows that he's ready to be seen on that level. So again, it's a great example of the development of a wrestler. It's all coming together for him. He's still not the finished article. We don't proclaim him to be that, but you look at him as a top guy, you look at his presentation, the fact he's now being booked outside. When he first started working for Rev Pro, he came through our training school. So as a result, I always say something as well, which I kind of find funny. People who come through our training school, we're kind of not seen as one of the cool promotions, right? Because our training school is not all mate with everyone, but I feel so it's kind of, so I find that, a lot of our guys, when they're getting outside bookings, it's not as easy as being in with the it crowd, so to speak, right? But I think the testament to JJ is now being booked outside of Rev Pro on a regular basis. You see him all around Europe, but most importantly around the UK, and you see him headlining as champion, right? And that's what he needs. Headlines as champion, and it adds another string to his bow, because it teaches him how to carry a promotion. It teaches him how to be the superstar, and that's kind of almost what Cesare's doing at the moment as well. And his strong advice to him is, especially in Spain, Cesare needs to become the standard bearer for Spanish professional wrestling. He needs to be the Zack Sabre Jr. or before him, the Doug Williams, I remember everyone looked at themselves, when everyone was coming through, when I first started, it was always, who's going to be the next Doug Williams, right? I don't think anyone ever really took that mantle. I guess you could say Zach maybe in the end, but they're very different wrestlers. But but it was always, who's going to be the next Doug Williams? And you just heard about so many wrestlers throughout the years. He's the next Doug Williams. He's the next Doug Williams. He's the next Doug Williams. And that was almost an unfair sense of pressure on other people coming through. But Cesare, I want him to be that guy in Spain where everyone's, who's the next Cesare? I want that to be the thing. And the Spanish scene is so exciting as well, because there's a lot of young, exciting talents coming through Spain. And the cool thing about them is they've had no one to work. They've been working with each other, right? But now Cesare can come back and he can take the lessons that he's learned in Rev Pro and he can bring that back to, his guys in Madrid, his guys in Barcelona. He can take that back to those guys and pass on the lessons that he's learned, which almost puts those guys a step ahead. So then the people that are coming through right now, they're going to start learning from best practice rather than learning from trial and error, So I think that's a wrestling scene to look out for as well, that Spanish wrestling scene. And we'll be doing a lot more with Rev Pro in Spain in the next year. I think it's all very exciting.
It's one of those things as well that also breeds kind of confidence, is that you're willing to put these talents, once they get to a level, in the key spots, in the main events, and no more so than what we saw with the Copper Box show this year, with the anniversary show, where it was headlined by what we've got the rematch this weekend, Uprising with Luke Jacobs and Michael Oku. And, we talked about this show on the podcast that we did following kind of All In weekend, and how much of a kind of tremendous success it was business-wise as well. The Observer and Fightful published a number of 3927, which was only less than a couple hundred down on last year, which was headlined by former Best of Super Junior final in Will Ospreay and Shingo Takagi. And in some ways, you could say that it was even greater success considering that your potential catchment audience from All In was down kind of 36% on the previous year. So you kind of bucked that second year trend, which was pretty impressive achievement. What do you think the risks and rewards of building a card in this way is, in terms of you have to appeal to your regular fan base, but also kind of a casual audience, and then kind of get across your aims and ambitions that you have with your company, as well as kind of breaking through in terms of recognition or advertising. So it's kind of like a mix of things that you must aim for. But what's kind of were you very much kind of determined that your guys were going to be on top of this one?
Yeah, so it's funny. I was joking to people so I saw this a lot recently when we ran Global Wars UK at the Doncaster Dome, and everyone's going, "Why aren't you bringing in ex-WWE wrestlers? You should be marketing it like this. You should be marketing to families, right?" And so I'm an Arsenal fan, right? But I was joking, Tottenham Hotspur's Ange Postecoglou, his deal is just we are who we are, mate. That's what he says. We are who we are. They just do attacking football. They've got their philosophy on how they should play, and that they will they'll concede 5 to score 1. But I was always joking that's our philosophy. We are who we are, mate. And almost to a fault. But I believe in our wrestlers. I believe in our product. I believe in professional wrestling. And yes, sometimes I could make life easier on myself. And look, I'm sure, and as I said in the build to this Global Wars and the outcome of the Global Wars is, there was a promotion that did do houses bigger than we drew. We got over 700 people at the Doncaster Dome. I don't think you can, turn your nose up at that figure in 2024, right? And there was a promotion that got maybe 300, 350, 400 more at the most, right? But the difference is one promotion is still in business. Do you know what I mean? The difference is one promotion was able to pay all the talent, all the crew, so what's successful? Do you know what I mean? And the reality of the situation is as well, we've gone in with our philosophy on professional wrestling, and almost you might have to re-educate an area as to what professional wrestling is or your vision of professional wrestling. But I've got a strong belief in that vision of pro wrestling, and I'm not going to move. And I look at stuff for example, if you look at AEW, and you can look at the figures, the metrics of AEW, and look, I'm not slagging AEW off by...
We do plenty of that, don't worry. We talk very much about their metrics.
Right, and look, AEW, for me, AEW is a huge success story. You can't look at... but you've got to look at what's in front of you, right? And you can't argue the fact that AEW isn't as hot now as it was before. But where you look at the drop-off point is almost where they deviated away from their initial vision of what AEW was all about. And I understand why they did that, because again, I think they probably did it because they had so many people telling them that if you're presenting wrestling in a certain way, right, you're competing to this kind of bubble here, right? But what about the world outside that bubble? Think about the actual possible target audience you have if you start to deviate away from this niche style of wrestling, I would say. But then I think what's ironic is where WWE found success is where WWE started adding the high-level in-ring professional wrestling. Of course, it coincided with a couple of great storylines, your Bloodline stuff, Cody Rhodes. Of course, it coincided with that stuff. But the high-level in-ring wrestling was there. And then it was almost we'll get high-level in-ring wrestling, and WWE, no one's going to out WWE in terms of story, in terms of, they like to call it cinema. Hate that term, but no one's going to out WWE them. I think that one of the strength of AEW at the start was its rawness. You remember the promos which weren't scripted, and and again, like the kind of party atmosphere of the shows and the ruggedness of the shows. And I think that's what AEW kind of needs to get back down to, that initial vision of what they saw pro wrestling as. And that's my kind of philosophy of, we know what we want to deliver. And of course, if we'd run the anniversary show and we'd had a significant drop-off, then perhaps I would have turned around and said, probably shouldn't have done that. Do you know what I mean? But at least I can stand by my, morals isn't the right word, but I can stand by my principles, I guess, of what I feel is good professional wrestling and why I got into this in the first place. I feel like it was a big success story for me. Like you say, that our target audience was down greatly. The buzz wasn't as high, I would say, as for the show. I would say that, and again, there's reasons for this as well. Like, I just don't think AEW made enough of the success of what the first All In was. It was such a huge, monumental night for them. People should be talking about it still to this day, right? And it should be spoken about, like WrestleMania 3 is still spoken about in WWE lore. It should be spoken about like British Uprising 1, a half-empty York Hall Bethnal Green is spoken about by people who, reminisce and romanticize FWA. It should be spoken about in those glowing terms and made to be so special. But yeah, and I think there was a lot less fans from around the world traveling in to London because they want to be there for the first one. They want to be there for the first Super Show, right? But it's a lot harder to come back for the second time, right? So, and I think that the fans that are traveling in are the fans who are more likely to take in a Rev Pro show, right? And as well as that, the fans that I think what we all needed to be doing better, and I've said this to everyone who was running, and this year was better in terms of, Progress ran the Monday instead of head-to-head with us. The Eve show worked quite nicely in terms of location from where we were, and in terms of, you could watch the Eve show, then come down to our show after. I think everything kind of was a lot more on that level. But I just think like British wrestling as a whole should have been doing more to make this a destination weekend. And I think it was an opportunity missed the first year. Because again, everyone was too busy trying to compete against each other. And I did have something we were gonna. I'd just spoken to some promotions about doing some stuff. If we'd not wound up in the Copper Box, you might have seen something a lot more reminiscent of like a WrestleCon, for example, in terms of where WrestleCon do their shows with lots of people using the same venue throughout the weekend. You may have seen something like that, but then obviously the Copper Box came through for us, so we kind of had to, we had to take that opportunity to take that risk, and really try and see where the ceiling may be. I was very happy with it, and I feel like we definitely achieved something, and I feel that at the very least, people came away from that weekend, and a big testament, and they repaid the faith I showed in them. The fact that after 4 hours of professional wrestling featuring absolutely everything, a crazy women's street fight, the technical masterclass between Zack Sabre Jr. and Hechicero, literally everything you could imagine was on that show. The emotional roller coaster of Sunshine Machine nearly splitting up and coming back together. We tried to tick every box and give someone everything, but like, you think everything's been done. Especially because Zack Sabre Jr. came straight on before them and the crowd literally blew their load for that reception straight after winning the G1 and then coming in with that technical masterclass. We saw that women's championship change as well, the Mina and her, just amazing charisma. Yet still, Michael Oku and Luke Jacobs, two British professional wrestlers, were able to go in the main event at the end of 4 hours of professional wrestling and deliver, for me, an all-time classic that had people invested, had people on the edge of their seats, had people biting on the finishes. And when you saw them face off at the start and listen to the crowd at the start compared to where the crowd were at the end, they did an absolutely fantastic job of taking people on that emotional roller coaster, which ultimately is what professional wrestling is all about.
The presentation that you gave, Luke in particular, who was the lesser known, perhaps to a lot of fans that came into that show, was kind of really helpful for that, because you use the Bon Jovi. There's people still chanting that at shows now at Luke. And it kind of set it up at that level. So you did your part in to raise that from our perspective. But I actually think you kind of undersell yourself a little bit, because one of the big reasons that I think this year was so successful was the experience that people had the year previously. That was definitely a feedback that I have from people that travel to that show with us, was that was primarily one of the reasons that they wanted to go this year, was because how much fun they had at the show last year. But it's interesting. We've talked so much about development, and we're seeing kind of real big changes in how development is occurring, globally right now with wrestling. And one of the biggest ones, and you probably knew I was going to talk about this at some point, is that we're seeing WWE ID coming through. And that's changing kind of, again, how people look at independent wrestling and what part that has to play. What did you think when you heard that announcement yourself?
It's interesting, because you always have to... I approach everything cautiously, because I've got past experiences. History repeats itself often, and you don't know what the end play is. And I'm not even sure WWE will know what the end play is with WWE ID. However, I think it's a smart idea. Like from the way the strategy behind it, I think it's a smart idea. Like again, there's a WWE sparkle on it. The way they present people with their contracts and whatever, right? But I think fundamentally, from a business standpoint, it's a smart idea. I've been advocating that Tony Khan signs people to development deals very much like you do in football. He's very aware, obviously, the world of football, right? You sign academy players, right? And you send them out on loan and they develop. And then at the end of that loan period, they come back to their club, and the club will evaluate kind of what they've been doing during that time, and they'll evaluate whether they want to extend that contract, send them out on loan again, bring them into a first team fold, or release them, right? And I feel that that's a smart way of doing it. I feel like it's a much smarter way. And in fact, I think WWE have probably hit the nail on the head, because look, NXT, when you look at NXT, right? And again, I'm not here to drag on anything. I don't want anyone to think that I've got a negative perception of WWE. I've got a negative perception of NXT. Ultimately, I always say this, right? The only reason I'm a professional wrestling fan is WWE, right? I've got an affinity with that company. That company has provided me with so many great moments in my life. That company is a company that, in many ways, saved my life, right? I wouldn't be able to learn. I wouldn't be able to read if it wasn't for WWE, right? I learned to read reading WWE magazines, right? My teachers thought I was thick. It turns out I was just uninterested in the subject matter. And WWE wrestling magazines taught me how to read. So I want to make it very clear, whilst I don't always agree with WWE's business practices, and I don't always agree with everything WWE does, and I think that that's the kind of standards that everyone should be held to. I don't think anyone should be treated any differently because of...
All right, we're all set for the party. I've trimmed the tree, hung the mistletoe, and paired all those weird-shaped knives and forks with the appropriate cheeses. And I plugged in the Bartesian.
Bartesian?
It's a home cocktail maker that makes over 60 premium cocktails, plus a whole lot of seasonal favorites, too. I just got it for 50 off. So, how about a Cosmopolitan or a mistletoe margarita?
I'm thirsty.
Watch. I just pop in a capsule, choose my strength, and...
Wow, it's beginning to feel more seasonal in here already.
If your holiday party doesn't have a bartender, then you become the bartender. Unless you've got a Bartesian, because Bartesian crafts every cocktail perfectly in as little as 30 seconds. And I just got it for $50 off.
'Tis the season to be jollier.
Add some holiday flavor to every celebration with the sleek, sophisticated home cocktail maker, Bartesian. Get $50 off any cocktail maker at bartesian.com/cocktail. That's BARTESIAN.com/cocktail.
I hate is people's just blind loyalty towards one side, and they can do no wrong. When, let's be honest, they can do wrong. They do wrong, and unless they learn from those mistakes, which everyone can make mistakes. I hate this world where no longer people are allowed to make mistakes, right? You do one thing wrong and people persecute you that forever. I always say, if you're a well-written book, every book's got a crap chapter in it, right? But would you want to be judged by the worst chapter of that book, or would you want to be judged by the overall, right? And you'd want to be judged by the overall, right? And so like I say, like I feel like I'm not abolishing WWE of any of their previous sins by any way, shape, or form, but I just wanted to precurse this by telling you I have no agenda. And the reason I say this is because just one time I tweeted something, right, which was regarding, it was when there was all the talk about WrestleMania, right? And again, I'm deviating again, so feel free to pull me in at any time. But it was around the time of WrestleMania, and I tweeted, there's talks of WrestleMania coming to the UK, and I tweeted something. I quickly regretted doing it. So Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, who I personally have no time for, just my political view, right? Now, that could be to do, so I have a lot of issues politically with stuff like the ULEZ zone, the fact that it costs me money every time I go into London to try and bring trade to London. It's costing me a fortune because I'm having to pay the ULEZ charge. I'm having to pay the ULEZ charge for all the wrestlers that fall foul to that as well, and I fundamentally hate the fact that we are getting charged to, they should be encouraging entrepreneurship. They should be encouraging these events, not penalising us for bringing these events to the United Kingdom that bring people from all around Europe, all around the world into certain parts of London, which feed the local economy, etc., etc., etc. And I'm aware I'm a small footprint in that. So I've got my personal issues based on that. Right now, to see that someone who is penny pinching, and then considering someone like him would get on a private jet, and like people would get on a private, and their carbon footprint in one trip to another side of the world on a private jet is probably more than my carbon footprint in my lifetime, right? And then I'm being lectured to about why we have to pay money to blah, blah, blah. Anyway, completely political views. And if you disagree with that, if you disagree with my political views, that's absolutely fine. We can all agree to disagree. We don't all have to like the same things. I think that's something that I hope more than ever we can kind of all learn, right? Don't hate on people because of their political views, because everyone's got different values based upon their lived experiences, and you're all entitled to that. And the truth behind everything is the answer somewhere in the middle, right? Unfortunately, people can't seem to see that fact, and we get an extreme one side or the other, and we never seem to be able to get the answer we live in. So anyway, just a frustrating time for me.
You fit pretty much perfectly into a lot of the things we talk about on this podcast.
Right.
With that,
and you have to remember as well, I'm a small business owner, so I feel it more than most. Right, I'm not just talking from a idealistic standpoint. I'm talking from a standpoint of someone who pays a ton of tax, and I see myself, reinvesting in this economy of the United Kingdom, and I could see with a lot of these things how much quicker I could grow if the handcuffs weren't on. Right, but to see someone like that then tout WWE WrestleMania and basically say we're going to spend all this taxpayer money on bringing WrestleMania to the United Kingdom because it'd be a great thing, right? To see that, I'm like, hang on a minute, right? You've already got AEW running Wembley Stadium, right? Now, AEW running Wembley, and granted, it's not WrestleMania. Right? I understand WrestleMania is a huge thing. I understand WrestleMania is going to bring a lot of taxpayer money as a result. I understand that WrestleMania is going to bring a lot. It's going to be a sharp hit, an adrenaline boost, if you will, to a lot of businesses in the local area because of the week's activities, etc. But my viewpoint on it is that's all going to last a day. It's going to last a week. It's going to help those businesses short term, not long term. Because next week, when WrestleMania isn't in town, they're still going to need to operate. They're still going to need to pay their costs. So I'm talking about creating something which has got more sustainability. So, for example, if you take all that money that he's going to invest in WrestleMania and give it to me. If you take all that money that's going to go into WrestleMania and you spread that amongst local businesses and you use it for growth and development, you create a longer term, more sustainable deal, basically, right? And my point was, you've got AEW that's in Wembley. And AEW, when AEW's coming to Wembley, they're paying rent, they're paying for everything, right? So they're not asking for handouts, and they're giving the government this great thing, right? So why not just get behind what you've already got? Why not get behind AEW in Wembley and help make that a bigger success? Do you know what I mean? Like, it would cost you a fraction of the money. You're still going to get the same benefits, but why not look at it and say, right, well, what can we do? Well, there's a UK wrestling scene here. How can we incentivize UK promotions to run that weekend? Can we make government venues available to them to run fan conventions, to run Q&As, to run nights out, to run their wrestling shows and do everything in partnership with All In Weekend? And can the government platform All In Weekend a bit more, and make it that big deal? Is that something that is feasibly possible, right? And I think you might not get the same results, but you wouldn't be spending as much money, but you also might be helping local British companies, and you help those local British companies, and then they can continue to grow. We could employ more people. We could, we could run more events. We could run larger scale events and doing all that stuff slowly but surely. And guess what? The more money we make, right? And it's not even the more money we make. The more money we bring in, the more money the government makes, because we get taxed on all income. 20% on all income we get taxed, right? Get taxed a further 20% of its profit. So anyway, I made a point like that, and that's what I was getting at. And all of a sudden, I got this mass pile-on, right, from WWE fans who were just like, F this guy, getting emails. Obviously, people don't realize my role within Revolution Pro Wrestling. Emails from people saying, I was going to give Revolution Pro Wrestling a chance, and then this Andy Quildan guy has opened his mouth, and now you're not getting any of my money, right? So basically, I wanted to preface this whole thing by saying I have no agenda, right? And any opinion I have is a personal opinion based on my lived experiences.
But the thing is with that is that WWE are very clever in some ways, because they're kind of preying on local governments wanting to get events in as status symbols, as things that they can advertise in terms of, this is what we've brought to this community. It's very much a political play as much as it is an economic one.
Yeah.
But, I think some of it, and the reason why, when the WWE ID idea came out, and as much as, people looking at it and potentially thinking, is this an antitrust thing to look like they're working together more with other companies in a way that they could have been potentially sued for in the past. But the way that we look at it, especially in the UK, I think, is we think about what's happened to our kind of environment. And I mean, for me personally, when people look at NXT UK and what happened there, and they make extreme. So in fact, you talked about trying to the answer being in the middle, and I always hear the extreme of, you can either say it was the death of British wrestling, or they'll say, oh, it had no effect and it was something else. When actually, it kind of, for me, it felt like something that stopped the growth of that kind of scene at that time. It kind of, what was kind of your experience? Because I know, you had some definite experience, because it kind of felt like it kind of escalated as time went on in terms of what these contracts meant or what the requirements were of booking these talent, before it kind of became completely off to one side on its own.
I'll tell you a funny story. So I don't think I've ever told this story before, right? So when we finally got told we weren't allowed to, because obviously when it first came out, no restrictions, whatever. I've had my dealings. It's been well documented elsewhere. There's no need to kind of get into it again. But when the final straw for me of not being able to use NXT talents, right? And this was I find this hilarious, right? So we did a show at the Cockpit, right? And Travis Banks was wrestling. He was like the Progress champion at the time, right? And of course, we know the Progress guys were all in the office at the time, and Jim Smallman, I think specifically. But there was Travis Banks turns up and he's like, I can't wrestle. I can't really do much. I'm injured, whatever, right? So he's got like a bad ankle, and he's like, I want to save myself for WWE tomorrow. He had I don't know if it was a tryout or if he'd already got the deal, or I'm not sure of a timeline, but whatever. He's like, I want to save myself for this, right? Anyway, so I'm like, okay, whatever. And I try to make the best out of every situation I've got and try to utilize my talent to its fullest. And at the time we had one of our contenders, Rob the Gobelias, he'd just turned heel. And we were going to do a deal where basically Travis comes out, says he can't wrestle. Rob goads Travis into a match. Rob beats him in like 2.5, 3 minutes, right? But Travis has got one bad leg. He can't do anything, right? So I always say to everyone, context is all, right? Come back from the match. Remember, Travis shows me his phone. He's got a message from one of the Progress guys saying, what the F is this, right? With a screenshot from someone had tweeted, Rob the Gobelias submits Travis Banks in 3 minutes, right? Now, obviously, the upshot of this was Travis Banks was going to come back and kick the shit out of Rob Elias when he's healthy, right? But we're telling a pro wrestling story, making the most, like, he's literally like, I can't wrestle. So we're like, okay, you can't wrestle, but you can give us like 2 minutes, right? And how can we turn that into something? How can we make something out of nothing, basically, right? Classic pro wrestling 101, right? But I think they've looked at it and been like, they've just jobbed out the Progress champion and they've done it deliberately. How can we get them back? Do you know what I mean? Because it was the next day they all went off to the WWE thing, and the message came back, sorry, we can't work for you anymore. Right? That was the next day, and that was the straw that broke the camel's back, right? With the WWE stuff, right? So I find that whole situation hilarious, and I think that may have been less a WWE thing and more a Progress thing. And like I heard recently as well, so I don't know if you remember this one, but like when we came back from the pandemic, our first show back was headlined by Jamie Hayter versus Sky Smithson, right? Advertised, first show back. We built it up on our empty arena shows. That was the main event of the first show back for our women's championship. All of a sudden, WWE invent a women's tryout, and both Jamie Hayter and Sky Smithson are asked to that tryout. Sky Smithson had never had any interest from WWE before that point. And it just so happened to be on our first show back, right? And someone who's still employed with WWE but also used to work for Progress was the person who made that call as well for an all-women's tryout on that day with those girls, right? So, do you know what I mean? So I'm not necessarily saying it's a WWE thing. I'm saying there might have been a personal reasons behind this stuff happening, right? So you can't discount that either. But with the UK stuff, now I think fundamentally it just wasn't any good. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think like the idea behind it is fine, but the presentation, like, it just wasn't in. What on those shows could get you excited? And I said, you know, to me, it just wasn't any good. You know, like, and the guys and girls who were wrestling there, they're supposed to be there to get more experience. And as time went on, it's almost like they forgot the meaning of why they were doing it. And it became almost like a promotion in and of itself. But like, they were working, the Performance Centre was never full time in the UK. They used to work for 1 week a month. They used to go to the Performance Centre, and I think it wasn't even 12 months of the year. It was either 10 or 11 months of the year, 1 week a month, right? And then they'd do the tapings at the end of that week, and they might get 1 to 2 matches. So 1 to 2 matches a month it turned into. So something was supposed to be there to help develop the wrestlers, and they've regressed because they're not getting the reps in. And the shows they're producing just aren't any good. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's WWE light. No one wants to see it. When they were selling tickets, they couldn't sell tickets. With all the WWE marketing behind it, they couldn't sell tickets, you know? I think that lockdown probably came at a good time for them to be able to go into empty arena shows, because what would have happened if shows continued, like, you know, in front of paid audiences? The crowds would have just gone down and down and down. They would have started bringing in main roster guys, and then all of a sudden they'd have to use only main roster guys to draw, and then all of a sudden the philosophy of NXT UK disappears anyway. And then if I'm someone making decisions in WWE, I'm looking at it and I'm saying, we can be doing monster house show business in the UK, but we're watering it down because every single time we come to the UK, someone comes across thinking, oh, I'm going to see John Cena and Roman Reigns and all these guys. And then they, when they see a WWE show come in and it's an NXT UK show, and then they're going to be hesitant to come back next time. And, so then they're going to have to stop using their WWE marketing stuff to market towards these NXT guys. So it was always kind of doomed to failure, because they didn't try to create anything that was different to anything that was readily available to them. And with all the resources and all the talent they had at their disposal, it was disappointing. So I think from that perspective, that was the most disappointing thing about it. And I think that almost the fact that a lot of wrestlers were unable to get their reps in, I think that was one of the most damaging things to British wrestling. I think that one of the things as well was I think there was too much of a dependency on NXT UK talent. And I think that a lot of people saw it as, oh, yes, we put the WWE logo on our posters now with these NXT UK guys. And when the guys got pulled from their shows, because they had that dependency on the talent, they hadn't prepared for the future. So it was a wake-up call for a lot of promotions. I agree with you when you said that it stopped the trajectory of British wrestling going up, because I think when the British wrestling was almost like a cool underground thing at the time. And I think that the second that NXT UK came about, I don't think it was cool, And I think that one of the strengths, I look at it, the reason why they went with those Progress guys to run it is because Progress created something which had the perception of being cool. It had something which is the perception of being a little gang all together.
It almost felt like a cult at times. So if you were outside it, so for us as like Northerners, particularly, like when you went to like a London Progress show, it was like a different world. You kind of felt like you had to adapt.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's exactly how. That's it. And I looked at it like that as well. And I knew that style of wrestling could never be sustainable. That style of wrestling promotion could never be sustainable. It was never going to last forever. So again, it almost all came about an opportune time for them, because obviously it stopped them having to be on that downward trajectory, and then they jumped off the ship at an opportune time for them. But fair play, again, I'm not sitting here knocking anyone, because fair play, again, you can look at Progress now and you can be like, well, it's not what it was, etc., etc. But the fact that they've been able to generate what they have based on their starting point, and they're still able to draw respectable crowds and still have got a group of people invested in their product, fair play to them. I think that it's obviously, again, it's not what it was and it's not ideal, and it's not my cup of tea when it comes to pro wrestling, but it's certainly got something, it's got something tangible there. But you can't blame NXT for the fall of Progress, because it was always going to happen. It was never, unless they changed the way they ran their shows or the way they operated and stopped. I just always remember, again, when Travis Banks won the Progress Championship, right? And his was a championship reign which was a failure, right? And when he won that championship, the picture on social media the next day was Jim Smallman sat in the middle of the ring with streamers all over him saying, "We did it," right? When that becomes a focal point ahead of your most important championship changing hands and there being a new champion, a babyface champion as well, then that it's not sustainable. It's not, because pro wrestling is pro wrestling. It doesn't matter what you say. It's still going to appeal. Those same things that appeal to a wrestling fan, they're still. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't, it might be framed slightly differently, but we all watch wrestling for the same reason: that escapism, that journey, that story. You have to change stuff up. And I think that was always destined to happen. So I think that NXT UK turned British wrestling into something which is uncool. And I think that when it became uncool, that's when it became hard, right? But what I will say, and I think that there's almost a revisionist history that people like to use to say, NXT UK killed British wrestling. What I will say is, if you look at 2020, the top of 2020, we were doing the best business we've ever done. I say in terms of frequency of shows, in terms of numbers we were drawing. I just remember we'd done, when I started getting scared about COVID, we'd done, because I saw it coming. I was like, oh, what if this affects our shows, right? And I remember we did a show in Stevenage with Rhino headlining, and it was absolutely rammed. And That was great. We just were just running, reminiscent of a schedule we've got at the moment. It was when we started to up the frequency of shows we were running, but then we'd just done that show at York Hall, and the last scene at that show at York Hall was Ospreay, Giselle Shaw, and Michael Oku, the 3 new champions, standing tall in the middle of the ring together, and there was just a real sense of, we smashed it. Our first 5-star match, Ospreay and Zack Sabre Jr. happened on that show. We had LA Park against Eddie Kingston in just a crazy match, right? And just everything clicked. And we were going into, the idea was Will Ospreay versus the world. Will had got the summer off because he was, he was moving up to heavyweight in New Japan as well. And obviously that was one of the nice synergies that we had, where Will moved up to heavyweight in UK and New Japan at the same time. And it was, so he was going to have the summer off, because obviously he wasn't going to be doing the junior tag league, he wasn't going to be doing Best of Super Juniors. And it was going to be the summer of Ospreay. Will Ospreay versus the world. And that was a time when, any Will Ospreay match was gold, and some of the names we had lined up to face him, it was going to be such an exciting summer, basically. And then COVID had to selfishly ruin it. And then obviously you had COVID, you had Speaking Out, and then you had coming back from that, and the sense of uncertainty. And I think that whole period combined, so you can include NXT UK making British wrestling uncool, and then you can add the Speaking Out, you can add the COVID, you can add those things combined, and that's where a lot of people left and didn't come back. That's where a lot of people, your core people, they stayed, because anyone who knows wrestling, like I'm sure you're the same. When wrestling's in your blood, it's in your blood. As many times as you try to grow up and get out this habit of professional wrestling, just when you think you're out, they pull you back in. And it doesn't matter how much you try,
we did lose, personally, my husband was doing quite a lot of promo photography in British wrestling prior to Speaking Out, and now just kind of does the wrestling reunions for the World of Sport guys. So there were people that just kind of really were kind of felt affected by that. But yeah,
it's interesting, isn't it? Because those World of Sport guys probably got up to way worse than these guys doing Speaking Out.
Yeah,
but don't tell your husband that. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, he knows, but it's just kind of a weird, I don't know. I think there's something about being kind of personally around situations like that and feeling powerless that I think is, not to talk for him, but I think that's kind of something that really kind of speaks to. In terms of Speaking Out, I know you've done plenty of interviews kind of discussing that environment, but you run 2 schools, one in London, as you said, and one in Portsmouth. Portsmouth one, on the back of FWA Academy being there for so long, which is kind of one of the reasons I really got into independent wrestling myself, being based from there. But the biggest thing with Speaking Out for me is not to go and rehash everything, but is what do you have in place that ensures that your wrestlers, everyone else that works in your company, is kind of safeguarded, and especially because you do junior classes as well as adult classes at your schools.
Yes, so it's a good question. I think that's the most pertinent question of all. Like, what are you doing to make sure this stuff doesn't happen again? Now, if you look at our stuff, nothing. There's so many different cases, and I think this is one of the most. And again, I've spoken about this in great detail, but there were so many different cases, and there's so many varying degrees of cases. And I think that one of the biggest issues with Speaking Out was. I don't want to say the grey area, because I think that's just an absolute cop-out, but I think there were differing degrees in severity of the cases. And I think one of the worst things about it was that everyone was lumped in with the same terms. I think that terms were often redefined. So it was like, you forget about what the traditional meaning of one of these words was. You would redefine it to suit your situation, and then you would label that person with one of these terms today, and then tomorrow you forget that you've redefined that term, and you go back to that original definition. And I think that there are many people to this day that when certain names come up, they will go, "This guy's a XYZ," and call them names, right, which aren't strictly true. but they'll be calling them names based on the original definition of the term, not the way it was redefined during speaking out. There were lists of people who'd done absolutely deplorable things, and there were lists of people who, yes, they'd made mistakes, but they weren't in the same ballpark as some of the other people, and they were just bucketed together in this hate list, right? So I think that it's very important. I always say context is all with everything. So we go back to that, the progress, looking at a result and not understanding the context. That's one example of context is all, but here's another example of context is all, right? And I feel that we have to be in a situation of growth and development always. And as I said before, and I used it again, I think I used the example in another light, but again, you don't want to be judged on your worst character and on your worst chapter, right? And you have to understand that people make mistakes. I don't think anyone would want, if it's like ultimately, if you think about, the sort of stuff you're least proud of in your life, I don't think that anyone would want that stuff aired publicly, right? And want to be judged about that, especially if stuff like that happened years and years and years ago, right? So I think the most important thing for me is education and growth. And I feel like, again, one of the most important things, which I kind of found, I don't want to say most shocking, but most upsetting from my perspective, was that you heard so many voices saying, I felt like I couldn't come forward, or I felt like if I came forward, I would be the one that's punished, not the perceived star. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and
right?
look, we're seeing that still. Even in bigger companies, there's so many, we've talked about it multiple times on the show, there's so many examples of that kind of power politics still in play and keeping people silent.
Yeah, and for me, like what I've wanted to make clear is I don't give a shit what level the person is, where they are on my card, how much I've got invested in them, anything like that at all, right? If someone has an issue, they can bring it to me. So we've set up a thing with equity, which we've never had to. So the thing is, what we said when we set up our stuff with equity, we said the strength of the stuff with equity will only come into play when there's an issue, right? We will never be able to gauge its successfulness unless there's an issue, because what that brings is we encourage all our wrestlers to join equity, right? And that's, for me, is an important thing anyway, because they get insurance based off the back of it, right? So if they get hurt, they still get paid, right? But it also demands a certain standard from the promoter, right? So we have essentially invited in an outside union to say that we will adhere to these standards. And if we do not adhere to these standards, then equity can step in and govern us, right? And that is not something that we have to do. We could say, we're not interested, we're just going to do this all ourselves and just police ourselves and whatever. Now, the reason we did this is because I've made it very clear from the get-go. I think I'm probably the only promoter that's actually been transparent, actually been honest, that actually has addressed this head on. And I think that it's been to my detriment sometimes, because I feel like I made myself a target for being so forthright and being like, right, these are the issues, this is what we're going to address. And of course, I made mistakes in some of that as well, and I'd handle stuff differently with the benefit of hindsight, but we all make mistakes. And again, it's that period of education, it's that period of growth. We have to learn from these situations to make sure they don't happen again. So again, from my perspective, we were never one of these promotions where there was tons of stuff going on, because the reason was because I identified at the time. One of the reasons was that everyone's mates with the wrestlers, the after parties with you saw so many things with wrestlers and fans mingling at these after parties.
There was a show in the US quite recently that the half of the show was advertising like a after thing with the wrestlers, and it just made me shudder. It actually made me shudder just to think about,
Yeah, absolutely. Just a recipe for disaster, right? And it's nothing to do with the wrestlers shouldn't be like, because I feel a lot of fans, because again, this was a time when I guess everyone was so into it. And the reason they were so hurt as well was because, so I think a lot of fans were kind of hurt more by that, because it was people they considered friends. There was no separation. Like I could tell you like I don't want to go through names and individuals and whatever, but look, I could tell you David Starr's shtick, he was full of shit. from the start with his shtick that he gave. This is nothing to do with the speaking out stories. I'm not getting into any allegations. I'm not getting into any of that stuff. I've learned way more than but the independent movement, right? Absolute bollocks, right? From the get-go, right? Because it was all a vehicle for him to shift t-shirts of his own. It was all a selfish, it was a marketing scheme. It was a marketing campaign.
How do you feel about that being that in some ways you could say that you platformed it? Like that could be the challenge. Not platformed that, but you platformed him, perhaps. Maybe the challenge to that.
So absolutely. And I platformed David Starr as a professional wrestler, right? And I think you can say what you like about David Starr, right? And I know, look, you can David Starr was an exceptional professional wrestler. That's all he was ever in Revolution Pro Wrestling for, his wrestling ability. If you look at his movement, right, his independent and whatever, that stuff was more with the Progress stuff and the WWE stuff and whatever have you. That was all there, right? David Starr in Revolution Pro Wrestling, he's painted as a heel. His stuff with the independent movement and his his rants and all of that stuff, that was painted in Rev Pro as David Starr being a delusional heel. Now, if people wanted to buy into that, that's absolutely fine. But I remember I stood in the ring with him and we had a promo back and forth. And this was designed, the only reason I never want to find myself in a position where I'm doing promos with people. But David Starr, he turned Curtis Chapman heel, right? Because again, selfish wrestler, right? He made El Phantasmo look stupid in a promo, right? And El Phantasmo, he just panicked. I remember this promo very vividly. It was a promo whereby we're going to go back and forth to escalate to the point where El Phantasmo challenged him to a ladder match for the Cruiserweight Championship, right? And David Starr just tied him up in knots, selfishly, because that's not your job as a villain, right? Tied him up in knots, and then El Phantasmo was just like, well, how about we just have a ladder match? Right? And just killed the promo. So then I wound up having to cut the promo on El Phantasmo's behalf, where basically I said, you don't care about these people. To you, these people are puppets. And I remember this distinctly because when I said it, to you, all these people are puppets, I heard some boos because I heard people like, we're not puppets. Do you know what I mean? I heard that there were some people who really bought into the David Starr stuff. And I just laid out everything about what he says, he'd be going on about his independent rights and needs to be a medic. And I was like, there's been a medic at Rev Pro since day one. Do you know what I mean? There's been this, there's been that, all the different things that he went through. And, and I said, this is all to serve your agenda. So we always had that, the David Starr's independent character and all his rants and ravings. We always positioned that as the maniacal ravings of a heel. It was never there as a babyface. And again, if people want to, if fans want to gravitate towards that, that's absolutely fine because, we're not going to say who you should cheer, who you should boo or anything like that. But yeah, like I say, I never bought into any of that stuff whatsoever. And I think that, again, with him and his thing was one of the main catalysts behind the whole speaking out movements. Don't forget, it started off with a fan who was a well-respected fan, if you will, who had and he was the first one to get the light shone on him, and then it goes into David Starr. I think because people had such a close connection with David Starr, it hit a lot more personally, and it hit at a time when people had nothing. This was the focus. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I think people forget the times we were living during lockdown. And this became the focus, and this became this massive, massive thing. And I'm not here. I'm not negative on the fact that it became this massive, massive thing because it needed a light shone on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the whole point is, he was never your friend. Do you know what I mean? He was never your friend.
I think there's a line in wrestling, where it's very much blurred between investing in a character and thinking you're investing in a person. And that's become even more so in recent years. But when it comes to speaking out, I think you look at it twofold for me. So you've got the fact that wrestling is behind a lot of other industries as a workplace, as in the way that people interact with each other and other things. But then also you've got the tendency to look at it and it did become kind of the politics came involved in it. But I always think the most important thing, so you talked about, you know, having equity and part of that, and that's maybe even more accessible because, you know, this is a British company. It's a lot kind of more foreign US to have unions involved or anything like that. But that's kind of the important bit as far as I'm concerned at this point, is that it's how you move forward, how you're kind of ensuring that people are protected going forward. Because I feel like we lived in a period of time where we knew things weren't quite right, or you saw things that you didn't think were quite right, but you couldn't be sure and you didn't know how to express it. So having that method of communication and that trust is so important.
Yeah, so it's again, yeah, that's it. It's a communication. It's a knowing that people can come to you and talk. Like I've always said, like I've always hoped that we've had like an open door policy in terms of people know they can come and talk to me. And I always say, like I'm always happy to give advice, always happy to hear people out. But like now, if people don't want to take that step and come and speak to me, then obviously they can go via a third party in equity. If there's any question marks. Now, again, like I said, like this is only like I can't tell you it's a foolproof method because, again, as we said at the start, like only when something goes wrong will we know if it's an effective method. Now, so far, touch wood, we're doing good, right? However, it's not to say that there won't be something that happens in a year's time or in 2 years' time or whatever have you, whereby we have to put it to the test. And then obviously, as with everything, if it doesn't work, we might have to tweak bits, we might have to look at best practice, and we might have to do it like that. So there's that, you know, and I want to stress, like the training schools are very much separate to the promotion, but obviously with the training schools, anyone who's working with children is DBS checks, all the kids classes. Again, with the kids classes, the parents are present at the classes. You know, it's not, it is what it is. You know, the parents are present at the classes. We kind of separate now the juniors so the kids class always used to be one kids class, but now we separate the juniors and the teenagers because we're aware that obviously, again, when you get to a certain age, there's, you know, a change in everything. So now we do the juniors class, we follow up with the teenagers class after that. So obviously it helps in a number of ways because obviously the classes back onto each other. So there's that transition period across to the two classes. And even from a physical perspective, we've learned so much as well in terms of, you know, like even just from our main training, we've learned so much in terms of like, just how to train. I don't want to say safely, but like, you know, we don't draw people. You know, everyone's training came about because people watch Tough Enough and people watch what WWE do and whatever, you know. So it's like bump, drilling people. We don't do that, you know. We look after people now, and I want to say that it's a lot. You know, again, it's all. Everything that happens is a learning experience. Yep. But yeah, I genuinely feel that. You know, there's a lot of positivity surrounding everything we're doing, and that's all you can ask for. And I feel like, obviously, like I said to you, like people know I've taken this seriously. People know that I'm not afraid to talk about it. I'm not going to skirt around it. Whenever I do an interview, I say to you, you know, ask whatever you want. I don't care, you know, because ultimately all I can do is speak the truth, and I never have to worry because I'm not lying about anything. You know, I never have to worry about being caught up on lies because everything's consistent. You can look back at any interview I've ever done. Everything is consistent, you know. So I think that's that to me is the main thing. And yeah, I'd like to think that we're in a much more positive place now than we were. I think there was a lot of people. I hate the people who there was a lot of people who were very with the mindset of burn it down to build it back up, who helped burn it down and then just ran away and didn't help build it back up. Those people weren't helpful to the discussion or argument at all. And I think that's a bit unfortunate because I feel like a lot of those people as well were using it almost to try and get a level playing field, and were using it to try and build themselves up by knocking others down. And I feel that was very counterproductive.
And we felt that too. There was people involved in certain promotions or elements that wanted to kind of platform themselves and maybe didn't have some of the best behaviour themselves from things that we'd witnessed. So it was kind of difficult to get to grips with who had honest intentions and who didn't.
Yeah.
So, but, you know, I think one of the most important thing is you talk about having a third party involved. And I think that's really important with someone like you who is massively busy. As we look to kind of wrap up, what do you think the hardest part of your job is with how much, you know, you personally have to take on in this role?
That's a very loaded question. I think like there's not a single aspect which I could call easy. Like, but I think the easiest part of the job is the actual booking side of things. Like, I've got into the reason why I do everything I do is out of necessity, because I wouldn't be able to financially do this if we had like many different people running all the different sections. And again, when you're at the level we are, you have to do everything with this passion and almost ferocity. That you have to have that level of personal investment in it. And I don't think that, there's a lot of people who wouldn't have that same level of investment and drive, because it's not their baby, But I hate, if people ask me about my job, I hate pretty much every single aspect of it apart from the actual booking of the shows themselves. Honestly, I love the creative aspect of it. That's what I want to do. I love seeing my vision come to life. And I love training people. I love giving people direction. I love seeing people develop. I love that stuff, I absolutely don't love promoting. I absolutely don't love the technical side of things, like, enhancing our production, having to research everything. I don't love any of that stuff. I don't love the promoting side of things. But we do it because we have to do it. We do it because if we don't do it, no one else would do it. And if we and obviously the promotion wouldn't be able to exist without that stuff. I don't want to do accounts. I don't want to do. Do you know what I mean? I don't want to be, but we have to do it. And that's all part of becoming a legitimate business. I don't want to do reels and reels of paperwork. I think the hardest part perhaps is, when you move up levels. That's, you always encounter new hard parts. So obviously at first you're like, oh, I'm a proper business. I'm completing annual accounts. I'm, paying the tax man. I'm doing this, that, and the other. But then from there, it's like you make the next step. Like, oh, I've hit the VAT threshold. Now I need to become VAT registered. Now we have to start doing VAT returns. And that means rather than completing our books once a year, we really have to be on top of our books. So we know where we're at every quarter, so we can do our quarterly VAT return. But then that comes with the dangers of, oh my God, now everything, we're losing 20% on everything. So now we have to balance the books in another way. We have to find another. And then you do that. And then it's like, okay, now we're moving up to a bigger venue. And now that comes with the risk assessments that we used for the Wyvern Hall Sittingbourne are not sufficient to use for the Copperbox Arena, so we have to come up with new risk assessments. We have to come up with new method statements, we have to think about stuff that we never thought about before, such as, everyone has to have radios, everyone has to wear high-vis jackets when they're on the floor, basically we have to conform to the standards of a proper business when we are, that's why I think I find it so hilarious, some of the size of the productions that we put on. And if you saw the grassroots and just the minimalist operation that we have, I just find the whole thing hilarious to see the professional products we put out at the end of it. So yeah, those are the most challenging aspects. Like every time you take that step forward, you then have to learn more stuff. And it could be anything from all the paperwork to stuff, like I say, like upgrading the production. Like we had issues with production, long documented issues with production, but like, again, we're having to do it in a way which is sustainable. And first and foremost, our first priority is a live viewing experience. Those people who come to the shows live, right? The filming and all of that. So it's a luxury on top, right? And we do that, and we get them a live streams, get those working. But then as we upgrade our cameras, and like just for example, at the moment we've got like probably the best cameras in the UK right now, right? But we've only got two. We had 3 of the best cameras in the UK, but currently we've only got 2 of the best cameras in the UK because within 3 months of owning them, 2 of them broken. One of them's been sent and come back. The other's been gone for like 2 months, and then that's because now the cables we're using, where the new way they make the cameras it doesn't work well with being cabled. We tried wireless ahead of the curve years and years ago, and we couldn't get the desired results we wanted wirelessly. So we went back to cabled. And then we've now gone back to wireless because the technology's improved. We have to have wireless because the new cameras aren't designed to have, they're designed to be cabled, but more for like a traditional movie set, right? Not so much keeping up with the action set, right? So we've had to move to wireless, but then we've had to do a lot of research into that. and learn that technology has changed and improved and whatever. So to everything we do, it doesn't matter what we do. When we try to make something better, it comes with so much more, paperwork, lessons to learn, YouTube shoots. Evolving, and that's the way it is, and I guess that's the hardest part of the job, because to be able to continue to move forward. If we could continue moving forward and we didn't have to change anything we were doing, life would be easy. But yeah, it's that, and then prioritizing, choosing where the priority lies, and with people not understanding. I would love, anytime someone's got a critique of Rev Pro, I'd love to be like, well, here's the reasons why. And we can explain and give context to why the cameras might not be what you want, or the sound might not be what you want, or how we've got the sound down in small arenas but not in big arenas. Why we can't afford to hire cameras every show. I saw someone pricing up like you could hire this, and it's like, well, if a show loses money, I can't add more loss on. Do you know what I mean? Like we have to. I can't. I could justify everything we do, and I think that if I were to do that, people would probably have more respect for what we're doing. But if I spent all my time doing that, then I wouldn't have time to do what we're doing. So that's it's that juggling campaign, spinning plates, if you will.
Yeah, and that's probably some of the kind of the major things that you get feedback around, and especially when you've got something like RevPro on Demand where you're having your own service.
Hey, do you know something? Here's an example for you, right? So someone who was literally sat at the live show, they were in the live event, right? And they tweeted complaining about RevPro's production, right? Complaining about the camera quality, right? And it's like, how can you complain about this live stream when you're sat in the crowd not watching the live stream, right? And this was the first show we bought our new cameras in for. And I'd invested thousands upon thousands of pounds in these new cameras, right? Because again, everything we do, we own the equipment instead of renting it, because we can't afford to rent. We have to think long term, right? So it's almost like, it's no sit. Look, we got to that. We did the anniversary show. We made some money from the anniversary show. What are we going to do? Put that money in my pocket so I can have nice things, or are we going to reinvest in Rev Pro? I'm a sucker, so we reinvest in Rev Pro, right? So we buy these new cameras, and the first show we've got these new cameras. We've got someone sitting in the crowd who's always vocal about the camera quality or whatever. Someone sitting in the crowd moaning about the quality of the cameras when they can't see the quality of the cameras. And meanwhile, we're there with our cameras, which are worth thousands upon thousands of pounds, right? Which are capable, like you're getting HD, right, on the on-demand service, but they're capable of 4K. Like we're recording in 4K, right? And you're getting 4K downgraded to HD on the actual service. So you're not going to get a clearer picture, right? And there I am, having invested all this money, and I'm just like, what's the point? And that's what I mean. That's an example, but it's almost like those tweets often get, because it's easy to drag on something, right? Those tweets often get a lot of interaction. You can say something horrible about something and you'll get more likes than if you're like, oh, actually, the picture quality on Rev Pro on Demand's improved. So I
think that's just kind of the standard of discussion generally. At the current time, it kind of always feeds towards more of the negative. But when you have your own streaming service, and you've kind of gone against the grain of this year, and one of the big things that we kind of seen is a lot of independent companies going to services where their hosting is basically free for their content, but then they're paid using that original Amazon model of a small amount per hour viewed. And you've kind of shied away from that to pay for your own hosting kind of areas. But also that means that you're getting more from people viewing your content. You're getting more kind of back from it. So I think that's why part of the reason why there is such an additional focus. But how would you say that you are with feedback in general?
It's interesting. So I don't read feedback now, right? So it sounds bad, right? So I don't read. So if you write something about Rev Pro, I won't see it. Right now, I have people who read social media, read the Discords. The Discords are funny because Discords, people think, I don't even know what Discord is, right? But people think they're writing on a Discord and no one will see it, right? But I have people reading the Discords, reading the Facebook groups, whatever, right? I took myself all away from all of that stuff because it's unhealthy for me, right? Because like I said to you, I could spend all day saying, like, if you have a criticism, I could justify it. Now, I feel like you're a level-headed person, and we could probably have a discussion, and we could probably, we could either agree to disagree, or you would be like, oh, I understand your viewpoint. Thanks for adding context to it, whatever, right?
Yep.
But I can't do that for every point. So you do that to one person, then everyone else expects it, right?
Sure.
So I can't do that anyway, and it's unhealthy for me because I put so much into this. You need to understand, like, this is everything. Like, when something happens on a show, right? Someone might have a stinker match, right? And I might get blamed for the booking of the match might get blamed, or like, an angle might not come off the way we want, or we book angles and then all of a sudden people pull out of shows, and therefore we're not able to deliver that angle in the manner which we would have liked, and therefore it looks like shotgun booking when that finally happens. Or people will be like, oh, you've called down this certain angle, and that's not the intention. It's happened because of certain mitigating circumstances, right? Now, I could spend all day doing that, but that would, and it's so, believe me when I say, right, no one cares more than me. When a show's not good, when something doesn't come off the way you'd like it to, no one's more upset than I am, right? So someone might have a gripe about it, but I'm actually deeply hurt by it. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, not from their words. I've seen the same thing. And if it's something which is valid, often I will be deeply hurt by it because it's not what I've wanted. And I put my heart and soul into this, right? So I don't need to see that, right? It's not healthy for me. But I have people read this stuff, right? And they will feed back to me when there's constructive criticism, right? They will feed it back to me. When there's constructive positivity, they will feed it back to me. Because equally, yes. I don't need to see people saying, Rev Pro's the best. Everything Rev Pro touches is gold. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I love Rev Pro. I don't need to see that either. And I feel like you have to be balanced, right? Because I feel like you can't sit there and moan about, ignore people who are saying negative stuff if you're then just only going to take on board the positive stuff people say. Because as we said, throughout this whole thing, there's a balance which is somewhere in the middle, right? So I have people who look at this stuff and they feed back to me the constructive criticism, constructive positivity, right? There's stuff that they deem I don't need to see, which is if someone's just there being overtly negative, if there's no positivity behind what they're doing, they don't bother even bringing it to my attention, right? And the people that look at this stuff as well, there are a lot of people who know the mitigating circumstances, right? So there's no point in them telling me what I already know. Do you know what I mean? And then that may come in the form of the general consensus is they didn't like this, but we know the reasons why. Do you know what I mean? I don't need a granular account of why something sucked or wasn't as good as we thought it was going to be or whatever, So I feel for me, that's my I feel it's a good method. I really do, because it means I don't get dragged in it. And don't get me wrong, every now and again I'll see something and be like, oh, no, right? It's
natural, it's human.
But I think that this is over the years, this is the method that I've developed of being the best, and I think that, again, a lot of it does stem from that lockdown time. A lot of people wrote some very, very horrible things about me without even knowing me and without even knowing, what I stand for, and without knowing my principles and morals and whatever have you. A lot of people wrote very, very horrible things about me, which, again, a lot of it was tribalistic. A lot of it was without knowing the context, without knowing the full situation. A lot of it was I made myself an easy target, because I was the only person who was prepared to put myself on the line and talk about this stuff and not hide. So yeah, but, again, it's that stuff was hurtful because, when you put your heart and soul into everything, I'm not getting rich doing this. I'm, often I lose money. I lose time with my family. I lose, I get stress. I do this, just through thick and thin. There was a time when I was like literally on death's door, like in just after 2022. And I was in bed all week long just to make the shows at the weekend. And I was like literally so sick, and I cared so much that I made sure I made every show. And the only shot I missed was after I'd spent over a week in hospital, and I physically wasn't capable of being at the show, but I was at a show. I was in Manchester the night before I was admitted to hospital. I drove to the show. I drove back, right? I was lying in agony on a sofa backstage at the Victoria Warehouse. And like, if I didn't get admitted to hospital the next day, I might not be here today. Do you know what I mean? That's how bad it was, right? But that's how committed I am to wrestling. Right, and that's how committed I am to Rev Pro. To see or feel anyone question that my motives or my morals or my agenda for doing any of his stuff, that's when I kind of take it personally, because I've given everything for this business, and you can look at it very stupid, but like I just and sometimes I do. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes it blows my mind how stupid wrestling is, but then how beautiful it is at the same time. And like I look at it like, we've had like this year has been tough for all of us. We've lost two very close friends in Curtis and Jamie, but like without them, without professional wrestling, they wouldn't even be in my life. I always joked that if I saw Jamie, Jamie was one of my best friends, and like when I saw Jamie, like if I'd seen him in the street, I would have walked to the other side of the road in fear, because of just his, the way his outward look. But he was one of the most warmest and most beautiful people, like the most straight, upfront people you could ever meet in your life. And I owe that friendship to professional wrestling. And so as much as we can drag on professional wrestling and talk about the negatives, right, we have to look at the positives as well, and the relationships you make and the memories you make and the legacy that you create as well. And ultimately, that's why we do this. We do this for legacy. So yeah. And I feel like as ridiculous as professional wrestling is, just think about it for a second. Like I'm just like, so especially now more than ever, I will have booking meetings that will go on for like 2-3 hours. And I will be thinking, what are we debating? Do you know what I mean? Like,
yes.
Ultimately, what are we debating? Who cares, right? But the answer is we care. And it's because we care that we're able to get the results we get. And that's why we do it.
So, in that regard, what are, you're on to 12 years now, and that's an incredible achievement in itself in this environment, this live event environment, even, not even just pro wrestling. But what would you say you've been most proud of during this time?
I
know it's quite of a all collective question to chuck you at the end there.
So I think there's so many things. So it's either so being most proud of seeing people. I love seeing people achieve what seeing Will Ospreay walk out of Wembley Stadium, right? I love reveling in other people's success. So I take no credit for Will's success, but I love seeing that he's been able to achieve his potential. I always remember with Will, we had a conversation. He had a crossroads where he could have gone and done the WWE Cruiserweight Classic, or he could have gone and done New Japan Best of Super Juniors, his first, or the show before, whenever he made his New Japan debut. And we had a conversation. It was like, bet on yourself. And essentially, it's like, you do whatever you want, but I suggest you bet on yourself, right? And it was like, do you want to go into WWE as, I can't remember the example I used at the time, but it's whoever was like a indie guy who was now like in a low role in WWE, or do you want to go into WWE as AJ Styles? Right, where you craft a career for yourself. Yeah, you might not be earning as much money short term, but you craft a career for yourself in the long term. You raise your value on the market, and then you find yourself in a position where you can walk into a top position. And of course, we never knew AEW would become a thing at the time, and that would be his chosen destination. But he could have gone to WWE at the same time. And he would have walked into WWE as a top guy the same way he's walked into AEW as a top guy. So to see the fact that he bet on himself 10 years ago and has, been able to effectively paint his own picture and stick to what he believes pro wrestling is, and to see him walk out of Wembley Stadium, that means a lot to me, right? And again, like I say, not for me, I take no credit for that, right? I don't want anyone to think that I'm taking credit for someone else's success, right? He had to do all the hard work himself, right? I just gave him the platform to do it. So seeing stuff like that, I find very gratifying. The Copper Box Arena, obviously being able to do that, that was a huge thrill, a huge buzz, and being able to look at it. And I think, again, at the end of it, seeing British guys get the reaction that British guys got on a card which was filled with so much, I feel that was very important as well. So, and then you see people making their debuts, you see people wrestle in front of their family, you see people, just to see people achieve, that's ultimately what I'm most proud of. And I hope that one day we can have that moment, that definitive moment. But again, as I said to you right at the start of this, compare yourself to yourself yesterday. So I don't know if we'll ever reach that definitive moment, because it might be, well, we've done this now. What do we do? What do we do the next day? But I feel that's to me where the pride comes into it. That's what we fight for. Those moments and seeing people achieve what you perhaps didn't realize they could achieve, but you knew they had it in them from the very beginning. And also seeing the realization of that fact as well. When they realize, they realize that they believe, and when they realize and they believe, that's when they become the most complete performers, because they're no longer acting. They're being themselves. So they have that confidence. They're not putting on a front. They are, they are confident and they believe themselves. So yeah, that's it really.
Yeah, no, that's a pretty outstanding summary, to be honest. So, Andy, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the pod today, and especially for giving up so much of your time. So we really appreciate that, especially on a show week. For anyone who is maybe on the fence about heading to Uprising or thinking about joining Rev Pro on demand to watch it, can you tell us what they have to look forward to? Why should they watch the show this Saturday?
So we always say it's all killer, no filler, always. But obviously you've got your Ironman match, your first ever Ironman match in Rev Pro, 1 hour. I think it's the first ever 1 hour Ironman match in the UK. Outside of, there was a Leighton Buzzard Ironman match during the pandemic, which was taped, but the first one in front of a live crowd, 1 hour Ironman match, Leon Slater versus Azoya. Anyone who's not familiar with those guys, you will be after this Saturday. It's two of the best wrestlers, two of the best young wrestlers in the world today. You've got, for me, the two best technical wrestlers, female wrestlers in the world, in Serena Deeb and Kanji, in a singles contest. And again, so this is one of those things whereby we've put a lot of focus into the women's division over really since the pandemic. But obviously, one of the criticisms about Rev Pro has been our women's division. We've always said that we're trying to build this women's division, and we want to treat it the same way we treat the men's division. So when we get an opportunity to bring someone in who's an international star in almost a showcase match, we will take that opportunity. It's no different to when we bring in, we might be like, oh, we've got, for example, here's another great example, a great segue. For example, Mascara Dorada. We have the opportunity to use Mascara Dorada, right? Mascara Dorada, one of, if not the best high flyer in the world right now, right? Someone who's going to be a future star in professional wrestling, someone who's a whole territory of CMLL is going to be built around in the future. He's, no doubt in my mind, he's going to be the next Mystico. So young, so talented, so great. We've got the opportunity to bring him in. And we want to showcase him. We want to showcase his style of professional wrestling. Stylistically, who's the best person to do it against? Robbie X. Fantastic professional wrestling match. So, back in that Serena Kanji mindset, it's like we've got the opportunity to bring in one of the most technically gifted professional wrestlers in the world, someone who's, again, had those lessons, WWE, AEW, but, been a coach in NXT, someone who's, had those lessons from around the world. You can bring her in, you can put her against Kanji, and Kanji's going to learn so much from that contest just by being in the ring with Serena, but also it's an opportunity to showcase just how good Kanji is and give the women's division that kind of feature matchup. And when you talk about feature matchups in the women's division, obviously Mina Shirakawa against Dani Luna. Again, it's got an added element of intrigue, given the fact that it seems that Mercedes Moné is interested in that British Women's Championship, but Mina's got to get past Dani Luna first, and Dani Luna's not happy at having lost that championship in the first place. Dani Luna, to me, she's a superstar. Like Dani Luna is, I don't know, I spoke about them a few moments ago about people who, start to carry themselves with that belief and that confidence. Danny Luna's someone who's now got that belief and got that confidence. You see the way she carries herself on the way to the ring. She believes it. The people believe it. She makes a connection with the people like no other. She's got a great power-based offense about her. She knows exactly who she is in the ring. And her against Mina Shirakawa, of course, Mina's getting all the accolades for a worker, in AEW. She's getting a lot of attention, but Mina can go as well, and it's a great contrast in styles, and that that's going to be absolutely great. We've got Jay Joshua and Connor Mills against Sunshine Machine. Jay Joshua and Connor Mills turned into an excellent, exceptional tag team. So that's going to be all kinds of exciting as well. I've probably missed something, but there's a few highlights for you, and of course it's all topped off. You say, how can you follow that? How can anyone follow that? The only two wrestlers perhaps in the world who can follow that, Michael Oku and Luke Jacobs, a rematch from Uprising. They've now in a singles matches had two wins each. Michael's interestingly going into this contest as a challenger. He's taken a viewpoint very similar to that of Will Ospreay that Will Ospreay took when he went into that contest with him, where Michael's saying, "I'm not sure you're the guy. I need to be sure you're the guy. Prove it to me. You need to step up. You need to prove it to me." And Luke Jacobs wants to solidify that championship reign. He said he needed to defeat Tomohiro Ishii to solidify that championship reign. But, you can speculate perhaps in his mind he thought the job was done there, but the work's just started. And this Saturday, at York Hall, Bethnal Green, we're going to see what happens when Oku and Jacobs collide again. I think one of the most interesting things about Oku and Jacobs, you can look at any one of their previous 4 encounters. Every single one is different to the one before. There's not been one. They've never followed a pattern formula. They've never been stylistically similar. They've each been different, and you've seen Luke be the aggressor. You've seen Michael be the aggressor. You've seen both men take different game plans and strategies into each match, and the difference in the outcomes have been millimeters in every single one. I'm intrigued to see how they go about this contest, and it's one of those things whereby when people wrestle each other multiple times, and they get to know each other so well, and they've got that chemistry with each other. That's where it becomes special. And when you add the fact that the Undisputed British Heavyweight Championship is on the line, which is, it's a championship which is known worldwide. It's been defended Madison Square Garden, Copper Box Arena, Mexico. It's been defended all around the world. And it's the most internationally recognized championship in the United Kingdom. I believe it's the most important championship in the whole of Europe. These guys, they wrestle exactly that way, like it is the most prestigious prize. They know when those big championship matches are there, the eyes of the wrestling world are on them, and they wrestle to that level. And that's why it's so exciting.
It sounds like everybody has a lot to look forward to on Saturday. Well, Andy, again, very much appreciate you being able to join us and your insight and especially your honesty, should I say, in this interview, especially considering that when I first kind of mentioned something towards this, it probably sounded rather sinister at the Doncaster Dome with my word choice. But no, we very much appreciate it. Thank you. This has been part B of the Trish and Sarah Wrestling podcast with our guest, Andy Quildan of Revolution Pro Wrestling. Before we go out, Andy, any final plugs?
Please just check out RevProOnDemand.com, which you can see our full archive. It's available on iOS and Android as apps. And obviously you can check out RevProOnDemand.com on your computer. It's got most of our archive. We've actually found loads of old shows that we're slowly adding now as well. So soon we'll have a complete archive up there. We stream every show live. We can't always get 100% success rate just because of internet in certain buildings. However, we are working on trying to improve that as well. But any shows which we don't get a big hit for in terms of we get the full version of a show up normally within 48 hours of the event. If we haven't been able to have a successful stream, at least we're making extra effort to get those shows up ASAP. But the live streams, we're not charging you individually. It's all in the cost of your subscription. It really is the best value when it comes to the streaming service genre, because we could be charging you for standalone pay-per-views, but we don't, because we're kind. We just want as many people as possible to see the product. That's the best way to support us, honestly, as well as going to live events. revolutionprowrestling.com will get you to the place to get all your tickets. We've got an exciting time ahead going into the new year. So please, however you can support us, be it online, be it at live events. And if you can't afford to support us, just spreading the word. That's just as important as well, because I say it time and time again, we do this thing one fan at a time. And, if we've converted from this interview today, if I've converted one person into a fan, then I've done my jobs and it's been worth my time. So thank you for giving me the platform. I appreciate it. And and anytime, I'm happy to come on again. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Very much appreciate that as well. If you have any feedback on this episode, you can contact us at trishandsarahpod@gmail.com, trishandsarahpod@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter at Trish and Sarah, or on Blue Sky under our Twitter aliases. Sarah is still working on fixing the Pod Blue Sky account, the one technical thing I'm not responsible for messing up. You can also catch up with us on the Social Suplex Network Discord, as well as interacting with the rest of our great community and many of the podcast hosts. Catch them and their shows also at socialsuplex.com, and merch for everyone on the network at www.chopped-tees/socialsuplex. Next week, our episode is our Christmas special alongside our friends from the Tunnel Talk pod, so look out for some fun seasonal listening there. Tunnel Talk is also home to our incredible producer Leah, who's really the brains behind this whole operation and will be turning this thing around. So very much thank you to her. Thanks once again to our guest Andy. I have been Trish, and this has been the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast. Thank you for listening.
All right, we're all set for the party. I've trimmed the tree, hung the mistletoe, and paired all those weird-shaped knives and forks with the appropriate cheeses. And I plugged in the Bartesian.
Bartesian?
It's a home cocktail maker that makes over 60 premium cocktails, plus a whole lot of seasonal favorites, too. I just got it for 50 off. So, how about a Cosmopolitan or a mistletoe margarita?
I'm thirsty.
Watch. I just pop in a capsule, choose my strength, and...
Wow, it's beginning to feel more seasonal in here already.
If your holiday party doesn't have a bartender, then you become the bartender. Unless you've got a Bartesian, because Bartesian crafts every cocktail perfectly in as little as 30 seconds. And I just got it for $50 off.
'Tis the season to be jollier.
Add some holiday flavor to every celebration with the sleek, sophisticated home cocktail maker, Bartesian. Get $50 off any cocktail maker at bartesian.com/cocktail. That's BARTESIAN.com/cocktail.